A few years ago, something happened to me that still gives me nightmares. The company I worked for started focusing more on hiring people with higher qualifications, and when they offered an advanced course that promised a salary increase, I jumped at the chance. The only downside? The distance. More than an 8-hour drive. Luckily, a friend of mine had a house near the university and offered me a room to stay in. It was a pretty isolated area, just 3 houses separated by small fields full of trees. I've always loved the feeling of being surrounded by the woods, wrapped in total silence. It was almost like a mini vacation every week in a secluded cabin. Usually my friend was there to welcome me, but sometimes, because of his job, he'd be away. When that happened, he'd leave the key in a hidden spot so I could let myself in. The night it all happened was one of those nights where I'd be alone. It was raining outside. The drive up was rough. The whole area had no streetlights. The rain was pounding against the car, and the dirt road had turned into a muddy mess. But once I got inside, everything was calm. I turned on the heater, made dinner, and worked late into the night. Despite the peacefulness, I felt uneasy. The house felt too empty, like something was lurking in the dark corners. I knew my mind was probably messing with me. I was in an unfamiliar place, completely alone, in the middle of a storm. I kept telling myself that the occasional noises I heard were either my imagination or just the house settling, old wood creaking and shifting like old houses do. Then I started feeling like I was being watched. At first, I chalked it up to exhaustion, but at some point, I could swear I heard footsteps. Soft sounds, like someone shuffling their feet across the wooden floor. I jumped up and shut all the blinds. The discomfort only grew, gnawing at me second by second. I called my friend, but he didn't pick up, which only made me feel worse. Eventually, I decided I was being ridiculous and just needed to sleep it off. There was no way someone else was in the house with me, so what was the point of freaking out? My room didn't have a lock, but my friend's did. I grabbed a blanket from the couch and went to his room instead. Locked the door behind me, lay down on the bed, and tried convincing myself I was just being paranoid. I'd explain everything to him later. He'd understand. But sleep wouldn't come. The silence was suffocating, only broken by the sound of the rain and my own heartbeat hammering in my ears. I picked up a book from his nightstand, hoping it would help me doze off. I must have eventually fallen asleep. Then, around 3 a.m., I woke up abruptly to the robotic voice of Siri. "Sorry, I didn't catch that. Could you repeat the question?" My blood ran cold. The room was pitch black, except for the eerie glow of the screen. Outside, the rain kept falling. I fumbled for my phone in the dark, but I couldn't find it. I was just about to turn on the bedside lamp when Siri spoke again. Understood. Calling emergency services. Right then, I heard heavy footsteps on the stairs. Not just one set, multiple. And something scraping against the wood, like nails digging into the steps. I wasn't alone. I bolted upright and, without thinking, ran straight for the window. The bedroom door shook from a violent impact. Then another. No hesitation. I threw the window open and jumped. I'd rather deal with a broken leg than come face to face with whatever was on the other side of that door. The fall was rough, but the mud softened the landing a little. A sharp pain shot through my ankle, but adrenaline kept me moving. I ran across the soaked field, not daring to look back. The wind and rain drowned out most sounds, but I knew something was out there. Something moving in the darkness. Something that didn't belong. I had no idea if I was actually being chased, or if my own terror was playing tricks on me. Every shadow looked like a figure. Every noise made me want to scream. When I finally stopped to catch my breath, I realized I wasn't being followed. At least, not by anything I could see. Turns out, Siri really did call the police. About 15 minutes later, when I was nearing the village center, I heard the distant sound of sirens. When the cops got to the house, they found the bedroom door destroyed. Deep, jagged scratches gouged into the wood, like something had torn through it with bare hands. Nothing was stolen. Nothing else was damaged. Just that door, shredded like it had been attacked in a blind, inhuman rage. We never found out who or what had been in that house. I don't know if it was the target, or my friend, or if it was all just some terrifying random encounter. My friend stayed away from the house for a while, crashing at a relative's place. Eventually, he went back. As for me, I never set foot there again. Later, we read in the police report that the front door, the only way in, was still locked from the inside when they arrived. Just like all the windows, except the one I jumped from. Whoever, or whatever, did that was already inside when I got there. But why wait until I was asleep? And why ask Siri questions? The case was never solved. No suspects, no leads, just an open door to something I never want to understand. Hey, horror spectator here. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on post notifications so you're always in the loop when new videos drop. We post 2 videos every week. If you're really into this content, consider sharing it with your friends. It really helps us grow this community. Now, let's move on to the second story. The story I'm about to tell you started about 2 months ago, and I'm not entirely sure it's over. About 5 years ago, my wife and I moved into a house. It was modern, spacious, with a minimalist design that she loved in a way I never fully understood. From day one, that house made me uncomfortable. I'm not the type to scare easily. I don't have irrational fears, and little things don't freak me out. But that house had something I couldn't explain. It was too spacious, with long, empty hallways and a silence that felt amplified by the lack of walls. I constantly felt exposed, like there was always open space around me, a void that was never truly filled. I told her multiple times that I hated that house, but she loved it. We had invested a fortune, so moving out wasn't an option. I eventually learned to live with it, but I never really felt at home there. The worst part was the nights I spent alone. My wife is a doctor, and she works hospital shifts, many of them overnight. I'd never had trouble sleeping alone in our old place. In fact, I always thought it was healthy for a couple to have some space now and then. But in that house, the nights she wasn't there were torture. The silence became unbearable, like it sucked all the normalcy out of the house, leaving only an uncomfortable emptiness. Despite the discomfort, nothing weird had ever happened. Until about 2 months ago. That night, everything seemed normal. I spent the evening on the couch, trying to finish a book, but I was struggling to focus. I felt oddly drained, like something was sucking the energy out of me. I decided to go to bed early. It wasn't even 11 p.m. when I was already in bed. My wife's shift had started at 8:30 p.m., so she wouldn't be back until morning. I'd probably be awake by the time she got home. I woke up with a start around 2 a.m. The room was dark, with just a faint glow from the window. It took me a few seconds to understand what had woken me up. Then I heard it. My name. A voice was calling me. At first I was groggy, but then my blood ran cold. I realized I wasn't alone in the house. Someone was there. But as my mind cleared, I recognized the voice. My wife's. I felt immediate relief, but also growing confusion. What was she doing home so early? Did something happen at the hospital? I got up and went to the bedroom door. I reached for the hallway light switch, but it wasn't working. I flicked it a few more times. Nothing. A power outage? but my alarm clock was still on. Weird. I turned back to grab my phone. I didn't want to walk around in the dark and risk falling down the stairs. As I was feeling around my nightstand, I heard it again. My name. The tone was strange, artificial, emotionless. No urgency, no distress, no sign that anything was wrong. But it was her voice. No doubt about it. My whole body went on high alert. Something wasn't right. I stood by the bedroom door and, in the darkness, called out to her. I asked if everything was okay, told her to come upstairs. Silence. For a few seconds, nothing. Then, again, I heard my name. Fear took over. The voice wasn't responding to me. It was just repeating my name, mechanically. Something was wrong. Very wrong. I shut the bedroom door and locked it. Grabbed my phone and called her. It rang. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3. Then it went to voicemail. My heart was pounding. I was about to call again when I got a text. Everything okay? Sorry, I can't talk. My shift is crazy busy. I'll be home by 9 a.m. If it's urgent, call me again. My whole body tensed. My wife was at the hospital. So who, or what, was in the house? That night, I didn't hear anything else. But I didn't sleep. I sat in bed, phone in hand, trying to figure out what to do. I had never been that scared in my life. And I should mention, I've been home alone a lot since I was a kid. It never bothered me. If anything, I used to love those moments to myself. When my wife got home in the morning, I forced a smile and told her I had called her in the middle of the night, half asleep. Maybe I was sleepwalking. She thought it was weird, but she was too exhausted to dwell on it. She took a shower and went to bed. Since that night, I haven't been alone again. She's been working morning shifts, covering for a pregnant coworker. But I know that eventually she'll go back to night shifts. I know I'll be alone in this house again. And I know that whatever was here that night is still here. Sometimes I can feel it. When I walk down the upstairs hallway, I feel something watching me from behind, even though I know my wife is downstairs. When I turn around, there's nothing. Just the emptiness of that hallway. I don't know what it was. I don't know if I want to know. But I'm sure of one thing. This story isn't over yet. I must have been around 12 or 13 when it happened. I remember every single detail as if it happened yesterday, and sometimes I feel like I'm still trapped in that night. It was Valentine's Day, and the rain came down in relentless sheets. My parents, as always, planned to go out for dinner, and initially wanted to leave me with Mrs. Alice, our neighbor at the end of the street. Not that I minded staying with her. Honestly, I liked it. She baked me cookies, let me play with her cats, and never got mad when I stayed up past bedtime. But at school, the kids teased me for it, called me a baby for never staying home alone. So, that year, I put my foot down. I begged, argued, insisted, until my parents finally caved. Looking back, that might have been the worst decision of my life. Worse still, I bragged about it. Told everyone at school that I'd be home alone, that I wasn't scared, that I was mature enough. That bit of arrogance might have led to everything that came next. The night came. My parents left, my mother drilling into me one last time. Don't open the door for anyone, no matter what. The only exception is Mrs. Alice. If you need anything, call us. We'll be home as soon as we can. Dinner was already made, just needed heating, so I flopped onto the couch and put on some teen drama I wasn't normally allowed to watch. Outside, the storm raged on. Wind howling through the trees, rain hammering against the windows. Around 8:30 p.m., I got up to heat my food. That's when I first noticed the car. It was parked right in front of my house, engine off. Through the downpour and the darkness, I could barely make out the silhouette of someone inside. A small chill ran through me, but I brushed it off. It might seem strange that something like this unsettled me, but just so you understand better, the street I lived on was wide, full of parking spaces, and had large houses that were far apart from each other. The road was empty, except for the occasional neighbor's car. A car parked right in front of my house was intentional. I told myself it probably was a neighbor's friend, or someone waiting for the rain to let up. I ignored it and went back to waiting for the microwave to finish. Then, as I turned to go back to the living room, I saw it. A shadow moving past the window. My heart skipped a beat. There was no reason for anyone to be that close to the house. I stood there, frozen, my mind racing. My first instinct was to call my parents. But then I hesitated. If I panicked now, they'd never let me stay home alone again. They would say I wasn't ready. So I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination. And I forced myself to sit back down. Not even 5 minutes later, I heard a noise. A dull thud, muffled, like something shifting in the garage. I sat up, ears straining. Silence. Nothing else. Then the phone rang. I jumped and let out a shaky breath. Of course. My parents checking in. I hurried to pick up, but there was no voice on the other end. "Hello?" I asked, my own voice barely above a whisper. Silence. "Mom? Dad?" Then finally, a voice. A deep, gravelly whisper that sent ice through my veins. "You're not alone." I couldn't breathe. The room spun. The car outside, the shadow in the window, the noise from the garage. Everything fell into place and made me realize that none of it had been my imagination. Someone was inside my house. I didn't think. I acted. The phone slipped from my hands, crashing to the floor, and I bolted for the kitchen door. As I reached for the lock, I heard it. The door to the garage creaking open. Heavy, fast footsteps. Then, a man burst into the kitchen, charging straight at me. I barely had time to react. My hands fumbled at the lock. He was almost on me when it happened. He slipped. His feet caught on the rug in the hallway, and he crashed to the floor. It gave me just enough time to rip the door open and sprint outside, screaming into the rain. I thought about running to the backyard, but he would catch me. He was bigger, faster. So I did the only thing I could. I ran for Mrs. Alice's house. My bare feet slapped against the wet pavement as I pounded on her door, not daring to look back. My chest burned, my hands ached from how hard I was knocking. Then, despite myself, I turned. Through the downpour, through the darkness, I saw him. He hadn't followed me outside. He stood inside my house behind the living room window, staring at me, watching. The door flew open, and Mrs. Alice yanked me inside. I barely needed to say a word for her to realize that something was terribly wrong. Without hesitation, she grabbed the phone to call the police as I started explaining what had happened. The police arrived within minutes, but by then, he was gone. No footprints, no sign of forced entry. They searched the neighborhood but never found a single trace of him. And the worst part? I couldn't describe him. Not really. I had seen his silhouette, his movement, his presence. But his face? His car? It was all a blur. For years I wondered, was he watching me at school? Had he heard me bragging? Did he know I would be alone? Or was it all just a coincidence? A random act of terror? I didn't stay home alone again for a long time. Even now, at 38, I wouldn't say I'm scared to be alone, but I'm never quite comfortable either. Because every now and then, I still dream about that night. The storm, the shadow, the voice on the phone. Hi everyone, and welcome to Horror Spectator. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We dive deep into the darkest, most chilling real-life horror stories out there. And if you're a returning viewer, I'm so glad to have you back, friend. Dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's head back into the mountains. And remember, viewer discretion is advised.
Everything I'm about to tell you is based on instinct more than hard evidence. I don't have concrete proof that I could hand over to the police and expect them to arrest someone. I don't have security footage, fingerprints, or anything like that. What I do have is a gut feeling that has only gotten stronger over time, and the unsettling part is that I'm not the only person who feels that way. I'm going to tell this from the beginning and include every detail I can remember because I'm honestly at a loss for what to do. The whole situation is disturbing in a way that's difficult to explain. What used to be one of the quietest, safest places I have ever lived has slowly turned into somewhere that makes me uneasy every single day. For a little context, I live in a very remote part of the Appalachian Mountains. There are a handful of houses scattered throughout our little community, but mine, along with 3 others, sits farther west than the rest. We're the last homes before the forest really takes over, so people rarely end up here unless they have a reason to. Most visitors come by car because there's really nowhere else to go beyond our properties. Even then, the houses aren't right next to each other. If I stand at one of my front windows, all I see are trees in every direction. If I really focus through the woods, I can make out parts of my nearest neighbor's roof, but that's about it. It's only a 5-minute walk between our houses though, so despite having plenty of privacy, we've always been close. The 4 households out here naturally look out for each other because, frankly, there isn't anyone else to do it. My neighbors aren't family, but after so many years, they're about as close as friends can be. My wife and I have known them since we were kids. We've celebrated birthdays together, shared dinners, helped each other after storms, and settled into the kind of friendship that happens naturally when people spend years living side by side in a place like this. Whenever one of us goes on vacation, someone else keeps an eye on the house. They feed our 3 cats whenever we're away, and we water their plants or collect their mail when they're traveling. None of it is ever something we have to ask for. It's just the way things have always worked between us. Out here, you depend on the people around you, and over the years they've become people I trusted without ever having to think twice about it. Then, about a year ago, something small happened that didn't seem important at first. One afternoon, I noticed a car parked outside my neighbor's house that I'd never seen before. It didn't immediately strike me as suspicious. Even though they don't have much family nearby, they do have a few old friends who stop by every once in a while. I figured someone had come to spend a couple of days with them, and I didn't think much more about it. After 2 days, though, I started wondering if maybe that wasn't the case. The unfamiliar car was still sitting in exactly the same spot, but both of my neighbors' vehicles were gone. That led me to another explanation. Maybe they'd done one of those home swaps where 2 families trade houses for a vacation. It didn't really seem like something they'd normally do, but everyone tries new things eventually, and it wasn't impossible. As the days went by, though, the situation started feeling stranger. The unfamiliar car never moved. Their own vehicles never came back. Every curtain in the house stayed closed day and night, and no matter what time I happened to look over, I never saw anyone through the windows. No lights, no movement, nothing that suggested someone was actually living there. Then another thought crossed my mind. Maybe they'd simply bought a different car and gotten rid of the old ones. It wasn't a perfect explanation, but it made more sense than anything else I could come up with. Still, after about a week of seeing the exact same thing every day, I decided I was just going to walk over and check on them. Even if they really had gone away or swapped houses with someone, it felt unusual that they hadn't mentioned it to us beforehand. Like I said, that's just how we'd always done things. Not because anyone owed anyone an explanation, but because that's the kind of relationship we'd built over the years. Even so, I reminded myself that they didn't actually owe us anything, and maybe I was overthinking the whole situation. With that in mind, I walked across the trees toward their front porch and knocked on the door. The second time I rang the doorbell, someone finally answered. The moment the door opened, I recognized the woman standing there. About 2 weeks earlier, she and a man had come to my house and asked my wife and me if we had any interest in selling our property. Even back then, the whole interaction had felt a little off. I had told them we weren't interested, that we loved our home, and had no plans to leave. They kept trying to continue the conversation for another minute or two before eventually giving up and walking away. I never got around to mentioning it to my neighbors. I'd been incredibly busy that week with work around my storage barn, and even though the encounter had struck me as unusual, especially out here where random strangers almost never show up, life got in the way, and I eventually stopped thinking about it. Seeing that same woman standing inside my neighbor's house immediately made every alarm bell in my head go off. I asked where my neighbors were, whether everything was okay, and what exactly was going on. The answer she gave me was strange. It sounded like someone who had rehearsed an explanation too many times. Someone adding unnecessary details because they were trying too hard to sound believable, while at the same time carefully avoiding the parts they didn't want to say. According to her, she had approached my neighbors about selling the property. They had accepted almost immediately without any hesitation, finalized everything, and moved away. As she was talking, I couldn't stop looking past her into the house. Everything inside still belonged to my neighbors. Their furniture was exactly where it had always been. The family photos were gone, but almost everything else looked untouched. The front entryway looked exactly the same as it had for years. None of it made any sense. If they had really decided to move, why would they leave behind almost everything they owned? I was so caught off guard that I didn't even know how to respond. I thanked her, turned around, and walked back home. It only takes about 5 minutes to get from their house to mine, and my wife was waiting for me on the porch. I immediately reminded her about the couple who had come asking to buy our house, something she remembered because we'd both thought it was odd at the time. And then I told her everything the woman had just said. My wife immediately shook her head. There was no way our neighbors had decided to sell their home and move away that quickly. Even if they had wanted to leave, they would have needed somewhere to stay while everything was being arranged. More importantly, we'd known each other practically our entire lives. We had looked after each other's homes for years. There wasn't a chance they would disappear without saying a single word to us. Still, there wasn't much we could actually do. My wife tried calling both of them over and over again, but neither phone was turned on. For the next couple of days, we kept trying to come up with reasonable explanations. At one point, we even wondered if maybe they'd simply wanted a fresh start somewhere else and had decided to cut ties with everyone, including us. The problem was that nothing about our relationship suggested that. They were adults, though. If they wanted to sell their house, they had every right to do it. Eventually, with no family members we could contact and no way of finding out where they'd gone, we reluctantly tried to move on. About 2 weeks after all of this started, something happened that brought all those doubts rushing back. My 3 cats are allowed to wander around our yard during the day, but never very far. There are too many predators in these woods, and we've spent years teaching them not to leave the property. One afternoon, Marley completely ignored me for the first time in his life. Normally, if I called his name once, he'd come running. Instead, he kept walking farther and farther toward my neighbor's property. I followed him, calling his name repeatedly, but he wouldn't stop. Eventually, he reached a section of ground that looked like it had been disturbed recently. The dirt had clearly been dug up and filled back in. Marley stood over it, pacing in circles, sniffing the ground over and over again, completely focused on whatever was underneath. I didn't understand why he was acting that way until I looked up and saw the man from the couple walking toward me with a look on his face that immediately made me uncomfortable. He told me I was standing on private property and expected me to leave. I apologized, explained that Marley had wandered over without listening to me, and that I had only come to get him. I also mentioned that my cats had always been very attached to the previous owners because they used to look after them whenever my wife and I went away on vacation or visited family. The cats had spent years wandering back and forth between our properties, so it wasn't unusual for them to head over there. I picked Marley up, apologized again, and walked back home. When I told my wife what had happened, she agreed that something about the freshly disturbed ground and the way Marley had reacted didn't sit right with her either. That was the moment we finally decided we should call the police. Maybe it sounds like an overreaction, but by then there were simply too many things that didn't add up. Our neighbors had vanished without saying goodbye. Complete strangers had somehow moved into their house almost overnight. Nobody could get in touch with them. And now there was freshly dug earth on the property that our cat seemed obsessed with. The response we got from the police was exactly what I was afraid it would be. They told us our neighbors were adults, that if they'd chosen to sell their home and move away, it wasn't any of our business, and that there was no evidence that any crime had taken place. The deputy spent more time lecturing us about wasting police resources than he did listening to what we actually had to say. I won't lie, both my wife and I were furious after that phone call, although neither of us was particularly surprised. The sheriff's office that covers our area is a good distance away, and around here they've earned a reputation for doing as little as possible. Almost nobody likes dealing with them because they rarely take anything seriously unless they're forced to. I don't have anything against law enforcement in general. There are plenty of places where they do an incredible job. But out here, most people avoid calling them altogether and usually handle problems themselves. This time, though, we genuinely felt like we had no other choice. Something genuinely terrible could have happened to them, and we felt like it was our responsibility to report what we'd seen, even if it turned out to be nothing. About 2 days after that incident, I happened to walk past the same area where Marley had stopped. The patch of ground that had been covered over before was now completely open. There was a hole there, and all of the dirt that had been piled on top of it was gone. I can't really explain what I felt in that moment. The only way I can describe it is that every hair on my body stood up. I know some people are probably rolling their eyes hearing me say that, but I'm not someone who talks about instincts or weird feelings. I'm a pretty rational person, so the fact that I had that reaction stuck with me in a way I couldn't ignore. We tried to carry on with our lives, even though neither of us could stop thinking about it or trying to come up with an explanation that made sense. Then, a few days later, our other neighbor, the one I mentioned earlier, since there are only 3 houses out here, came back after visiting some family. The first thing he did was come over to our place, asking about the unfamiliar car parked at our neighbor's house. He wanted to know if something had happened to them, or if we knew who had moved in. I invited him inside, and we told him everything that had happened over the previous couple of weeks. Before we'd even finished, he interrupted us and said there was no chance our neighbors would have packed up and left without saying goodbye. Then he told us something that made my stomach drop. He lives alone, unlike my wife and me, and he said that when the same couple had knocked on his door asking if he wanted to sell his house, the whole encounter had felt wrong. After he told them he wasn't interested, he got the unmistakable feeling that they were about to force their way inside. He said both of them shifted their weight forward at almost the same time, like they had already made up their minds. The only reason they didn't was because they suddenly realized he wasn't alone. He had friends visiting that day, and the moment they noticed other people inside the house, they immediately backed off. According to him, it became awkward almost instantly. They tried to play it off, acted like nothing had happened, smiled, apologized for bothering him, and walked away. But he was convinced he'd seen something slip for just a second, enough to know that whatever their real intentions had been, they weren't good. Hearing that was the confirmation we needed that this wasn't all in our heads. I still don't know exactly what happened to our neighbors, and I can't prove that the couple living in their house had anything to do with it. I only know that none of this feels right. The blinds in that house are always shut now. You never see anyone outside unless they're coming or going, and even then, it's rare. To be completely honest, my other neighbor and I have already talked about forcing our way into the house just to make sure there isn't something horrible inside that everyone has missed. The problem is that if we do that, we'll probably end up being the ones in trouble. Worse than that, where we live, homeowners are legally allowed to defend themselves with firearms if someone breaks into their house. So we're stuck. We don't know what happened to our neighbors, but we're both convinced something did. We just have no idea where to go from here, and every day that passes makes it harder to believe we're ever going to find out the truth. I'm not someone who scares easily, never have been. I've lived in a pretty remote part of the Appalachian Mountains my entire life, and I have no plans to leave. I wouldn't say I'm afraid of these mountains, and I'm definitely not one of those people who refuses to go outside after dark. or keeps every blind in the house shut because of scary stories. I don't spend much time outside at night, but that's just common sense. There are predators out here, rough terrain, and plenty of reasons to avoid wandering around in the dark if you don't have to. Other than that, I've always been pretty relaxed about living out here. In all the years I've spent in these woods, nothing had ever happened that made me question where I lived or left me shaken. That changed about 2 weeks ago, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around what I saw. I was at home one evening, like I usually am. I just finished dinner and was sitting in the living room playing PlayStation when I started hearing what sounded like music coming from outside. Even though my house is isolated, there are a handful of neighbors spread out through the woods. So my first thought was that somebody was driving down one of the back roads with their windows down. It seemed a little odd because, out here, blasting music at night isn't exactly the smartest thing you can do. You want to be able to hear what's around you. Still, everyone has their own way of doing things. So I didn't think much of it. I figured somebody was nearby, and that was the end of it. About 30 minutes went by though, and it started getting on my nerves. It was getting late, and the music wasn't exactly quiet anymore. Curiosity finally got the better of me, so I walked over to one of my windows to see if I could spot headlights or even a flashlight moving through the trees. There was nothing. No lights, no vehicle, no movement, nothing at all. That made even less sense, so I grabbed my flashlight, stepped out onto the front porch, and figured I'd walk a little closer to wherever the sound was coming from. My plan was simple. If someone was camped nearby or hanging around the edge of my property, I'd ask them to turn it down. I deal with insomnia, and once I finally get tired enough to sleep, I don't want music keeping me awake. Out here, the sound of the forest is the best white noise you could ask for, and I wanted that back. As I walked toward the tree line, the music kept getting louder. Every few steps, it sounded closer, clearer, almost like I was about to stumble onto whoever was playing it. Eventually, I reached the edge of the woods, and I realized something that made my stomach drop. I still couldn't see a single light or another person anywhere around me, but the music was now incredibly loud. Then it hit me. It wasn't coming from somewhere in front of me. It was coming from above me. The second I looked up, something slammed into the ground right beside me. It made a loud thud, and I jumped back before realizing it was one of those small, portable Bluetooth speakers. Instinctively, I looked higher into the tree, and I don't think anything could have prepared me for what I saw. There was a man crouched on one of the branches, staring straight down at me. I'm completely certain it was a man, but his mouth, I've never seen anything like it. His lips were pulled back, exposing every single tooth, and they weren't normal. They were long, triangular, and sharp, almost like the mouth of a cat when it's hissing before it attacks. I think he even made some kind of sound when our eyes met. I don't know if it was supposed to intimidate me or if it was some kind of laugh, but I didn't stick around long enough to find out. I hadn't bothered bringing my rifle because, until that moment, I hadn't seen any reason to. I turned around and took off running toward the house as fast as I could. A split second later, I heard another heavy thud behind me, like whatever had been up in that tree had jumped down after me. I made it inside, slammed the front door shut, locked everything, and immediately ran to the nearest window to see if whoever it was had followed me. There was nothing. No movement, no flashlight, no sign that anyone had even been there. I just stood there trying to process what I'd seen. As strange as it sounds, I never thought I'd seen some kind of monster. I was convinced I'd just come face to face with a person, someone with some kind of severe condition, modification, or injury affecting their mouth. I still don't know what it was, but it wasn't normal. I called one of my friends almost immediately. I never even considered calling the police. I don't have much faith in law enforcement out here, and I honestly didn't know what I was supposed to tell them. The guy hadn't chased me, hadn't threatened me, and by the time I got inside, he was already gone. I locked the entire house down and eventually forced myself to go to bed, even though I barely slept. About 3 days later, I'm almost certain I saw someone standing among the trees near my house again. This time, I stepped outside with my rifle and yelled that whoever was out there needed to stay off my property or I'd defend myself. A few seconds later, I heard movement deeper in the woods, branches snapping as whoever it was walked away. Since then, I haven't seen anyone else or heard the music again. I still don't know who that man was or what he was doing sitting in a tree outside my house in the middle of the night. All I know is that he was human. I'm not talking about some mythical creature or some supernatural story. He was a man. But I also know that his mouth wasn't normal. Those sharp, oversized teeth are burned into my memory, and I don't think I'll ever forget the way he looked down at me from that tree. I hope he never comes back, but every night since then, I've caught myself listening a little more carefully whenever the woods go quiet.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Horror Spectator. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We dive deep into the darkest, most chilling real-life horror stories out there. And if you're a returning viewer, I'm so glad to have you back, friend. In this video, we've got 7 brand new stories, ones that have never been shared here on the channel before. I'm so excited to finally bring you this special episode on one of my favorite nights of the entire year, Halloween. Tonight isn't just about candy and costumes. It's about the things that hide in the dark when no one's around. Hope you have a terrifying night and an even harder time sleeping after. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's head back into the mountains. And remember, viewer discretion is advised. I confess I don't really know how to put into words what I'm going through right now, but I promise I'll do my best. Sorry if it comes out a little awkward or confused. The truth is, I'm going through something I don't even know whether I believe or how it's possible. And more than anything, I don't know what to do, and I need help understanding. I want to know if there are people who've experienced something similar and how they dealt with it. Another thing is that I wasn't the only one who went through this. My sister went through it too, as well as some kids who lived with us in that part of the country. But my sister and I haven't spoken in years, and the other kids from around here each went their own way. I have no idea where they might be today. It all happened more than 30 years ago. When I was 7, I spent most afternoons outside until the light went bad. We lived in a small house tucked into the lower Appalachians. Nothing fancy. Both of my parents worked the land, growing vegetables and raising animals. Most people in the area did exactly the same thing. The kids would gather in the streets and end up playing on their own. I don't know exactly when I first saw him, and there are a lot of details from that time I can't fully remember. But there are other things I recall as if they happened yesterday, not 30 years ago. Elijah was the kid who lived in the woods. That's how I remember him. Always half leaning against an oak or crouched on a fallen log, hair sticking up like he'd stuck his finger in a socket. He wore the same ratty overalls for months, even in summer. And he smelled like dirt and cigarette smoke, though I knew he didn't smoke. He had a grin that never reached his eyes and a habit of making people fall down for fun. On top of that, he looked sick most of the time, pale and wiry like he wasn't eating right. He should have been the kind of kid everyone else picked on, the one who got bullied. But Elijah never let that happen. Out of all of us, he was the leader. He was the rebel, full of personality, like he always knew more than any of us. And like I said, nothing made him happier than seeing someone hurt, or being the one to do it. At first, it was harmless stuff. He'd wait by the trail and tell us to race him, then shove us just as we reached the top of the stone wall. We'd tumble down, and he'd laugh so hard he threw his head back. Once, he took my sister's doll, smeared mud on its face, then dared her to grab it back. She did, and the head popped off. We all laughed, because you did what Elijah wanted. You wanted him to like you. It was around that time that my relationship with my sister started to fall apart. Elijah was especially cruel to her, mostly because she was small and cried easily. Not once did I take her side or defend her. I was terrified he'd turn on me next, so I laughed along with the others, sometimes even louder. I know I deserve the distance she's kept from me. Over time, his jokes escalated and got meaner. One time, he tried to set fire to our house while my sister and my dad were still inside. Even then, I couldn't bring myself to say it was Elijah. I played dumb, swore I had no idea what had happened. They made it out okay, but my sister burned her hand, and she still carries the scar to this day. But after that, I got cautious. I stopped going to the trail alone. I watched the woods with my chin tucked into my jacket like I was holding myself together just to keep an eye out. Elijah still came by, walking past the fence and calling my name like nothing was wrong. I asked my mom once who Elijah's mother was, if she knew the house where they lived. I was shocked when she told me she didn't know any Elijah. Our community was too small for that. But she didn't push the subject, and neither did I. She was worn out from working the fields, and I let it drop. One day Elijah led me to a clearing I'd never seen before. It was frighteningly close to our house, but somehow I had never noticed it. The place unsettled me, so I tried to play it off and told him there was a cooler spot up ahead, that we should go there instead. He got curious and followed. But maybe 2 minutes later I looked back, and I was alone. Elijah was gone. My stomach dropped. I wasn't allowed to be walking in the woods by myself. Then I remembered. It was Elijah. He was probably crouched behind a tree, waiting to jump out and scare me. So I braced myself and started back toward the house, tense the whole way, expecting him to leap out at any moment. But when I circled back to the spot where we'd first been, there he was, just sitting on the ground. His face was miserable, and for a second, I actually felt sorry for him. I asked if he was okay, and why he hadn't followed me. He just said he couldn't go any farther from our house than that distance. I didn't understand what he meant, so I pushed a little. he finally looked me dead in the eye and told me never to ask him about it again. And, as you can imagine, that's exactly what I did. After that, Elijah started showing up less. The last time I saw him, I was 9. He shoved a kid off his bike, and the boy had to be taken to the hospital. Back then, the nearest hospital was far, and hardly anyone around had a car, so it turned into a huge scandal in the village. The boy had fallen close to our house, so my mom came straight to me for answers. I knew this time it was serious, that Elijah wasn't just mean, he was dangerous. That night, for the first time, I told her everything. For once, she actually listened. She didn't brush me off, didn't tell me I was imagining things. Instead, she had a long, quiet talk with my dad later that night. A few days after, a woman came to our house. She burned some objects in the yard, small things I didn't recognize. I asked my mom what she was doing, and she told me they were just old items that had bugs in them, that it was better to get rid of them before we ended up with an infestation. I was 9, so I believed her. I didn't think much more about it. Then Elijah just stopped coming around. I don't think I ever saw him again. Sometimes, I'd wander into the woods and swear I felt like I wasn't alone. Like, he might step out from behind a tree at any second. But he never did. I felt a kind of loss, because for all his cruelty, he'd been one of the only friends I had. But more than that, I felt relief. And underneath it all was a constant fear that he might return. I asked my mom if she knew anything, and she told me his family had moved away, that I wouldn't be seeing him again. Time went on. Because of my cowardice, my sister and I never had a real relationship. Later, when we were teenagers, I tried to make peace with her, but she just told me it was too late, that I'd never been a brother to her. I don't blame her. When we finally left our parents' house, I lost contact with her completely. The only news I ever got came through my parents. That she'd married, that she had a child, that she had a good job, and was living well. But I never knew more than that. Both my parents passed away last year, only a few days apart. It was the first time I'd seen my sister in years at the funeral. Even then, she kept her distance, and so did I. She told me there were a few things from the house she wanted, but the rest was mine. For almost a year, I didn't step foot in that house. Then, 2 months ago, I decided it was time to start cleaning it out, preparing to sell it. I had no idea how many boxes were in the basement. I thought it'd be quick work, but it's been dragging on. And I'm only telling you all this now because 3 days ago I found a box filled with photographs of people I didn't recognize. At first I assumed they were distant relatives, but then I realized they were the previous owners of the property, before my parents bought it. I never knew much about the story, only that my parents had gotten the land for next to nothing, because nobody else wanted it. There were even people in the village who wouldn't come to our house when I was a kid. My mom always brushed it off as old superstition. But then, buried among those photographs, I saw him. It was Elijah, lying in a bed, sickly and mean-looking. Exactly as I remembered him. I couldn't understand why we would have a photo of Elijah in our house. So I started digging through old property records. And that's when I found out the truth. Elijah had lived in that house before my parents bought it. Worse, he died there, in a fire. He'd been a sick child, kept inside most of the time. One day the fire started, and he never made it out. I've spent the last 3 days in shock. I don't know what to think. I called my sister and told her everything. She listened quietly, then said she'd been through enough and refused to put herself through that again. She didn't want to hear any more about it, and she told me not to call her again. I honestly don't know what to believe or what to do. I've reached out to a university professor who specializes in the modern history of this region, hoping he can shed some light. But right now, I'm just lost. I don't even know how to start explaining this, because every time I try to tell someone, I sound like I'm exaggerating, like I'm trying to make something ordinary sound terrifying. But that's not what this is. My wife and I live in a small cabin in the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia, surrounded by thick woods that seem to breathe at night. I promise I'm not exaggerating. These forests are truly alive, and anyone who spends a little time here, or who can notice small details, knows what I mean. It's the kind of place that feels cut off from everything, quiet in a way that makes you notice every sound, every shift in the air. Not that the whole area where we live is like this. There's a small village nearby with the essentials for people to live comfortably. But here, where we are, it's completely isolated. Unlike most people who choose to live this way, in our case, it wasn't a choice. A year after my wife and I got married, I was diagnosed with leukemia. And since then, we've lost almost everything. My wife had a good job, and we were able to save a little. But with treatments and appointments, we were practically driven to poverty. Living here was the only solution to not end up living under a bridge. Still, even though we both live difficult lives, my wife has this gift for making everything better, finding every positive point and pulling it to the maximum. And honestly, she's pulled me out of depression more than once. So, even though living so isolated wasn't really a choice, it wasn't absolutely terrible, and we did our best to make it work. We were even finding a bit of happiness. But about a month ago, everything changed. Since September 17th of this year, everything we'd been working towards started to fall apart. That was the first night we heard it. A whistle, coming from outside the house. It was around 10:30 p.m. We were watching a show on my laptop in bed when it came. Faint at first. Just 3 soft notes, stretched out like someone trying to get the attention of a dog far away. I remember pausing the video and looking at her. We both listened. It came again, a little louder. The same slow whistle, like a tune that had been stripped of rhythm. At first, there was no reason to panic. It really could have been someone calling their dog or maybe a familiar neighbor. It was strange because of how isolated we are. But it wasn't impossible that someone might be walking through the forest. The strangest part was that it was nighttime, and locals almost never go into the woods after dark. Still, I got up and checked the porch, the yard. Even went to the tree line with my flashlight. I wouldn't go any further than that. But I didn't hear anything else. Didn't see any movement. So I went back to bed. The next night, it came again. And by the end of that week, the whistle was constant. Not all day, but every night, without fail. It always started around the same time, and lasted for hours. Sometimes it would drift closer, almost like whoever was doing it knew exactly where our bedroom was, as if they were right outside the window, even though our bedroom window is on the second floor and there's no balcony. I tried convincing myself it was a prank, that maybe some local kid had found a way to mess with us. It was definitely persistent. But in my head, it had to be someone messing around. I even joked about it at first, though I could tell my wife wasn't amused. She's always been more sensitive to the forest, sometimes noticing an animal before I do, or sensing when the weather was about to change. Small details that might seem insignificant, but have always shown me she has much better intuition than I do, and that I should listen when she talks about the woods. As the nights went on, the whistles started to get under her skin. In a way I didn't want to admit, it was getting under mine too. There was something about it that didn't sound random. It wasn't just noise. It was deliberate. Like it really was a person coming every night just to harass us. One night, it got bad. It was around 2 in the morning, pitch black, and the whistle woke me up. This time, it wasn't coming from outside the house. It was inside. At least that's what my brain told me. It was so close it felt like it was in the same room. I sat up and held my breath. The sound came again. Clear and sharp from the direction of the closet. My wife whispered my name, asking if I heard it. Her voice was trembling. I didn't even answer. Just grabbed her hand and stared at the closet door, waiting for it to happen again. It did. 3 long, slow notes. I could see the handle of the closet door, motionless, but the sound came from behind it. I swear it did. I couldn't bring myself to open it. We just sat there, frozen, listening, until it stopped. The next morning, my wife told me she was sure it had come from inside the bedroom. She said it with such conviction that for the first time, I didn't even try to rationalize it. I just nodded. From that point on, things got worse. The whistle came earlier and louder, sometimes from behind the house, sometimes right by the porch steps. I bought cameras, motion lights, even tied fishing line across the path that led from the woods to our yard, so I'd know if someone passed through. I spent money I didn't have on all that. But every morning, everything was untouched, and there was nothing on the footage. Nothing moved. We started losing sleep. I could see her falling apart from exhaustion, from fear, and I wasn't doing much better. Every sound made us tense up. Even during the day, we'd catch ourselves listening, waiting for that sound to start again. 2 weeks ago, we called the police. It felt ridiculous, trying to explain over the phone that we were being harassed by a whistle. But the dispatcher didn't laugh. She sent someone out. When the 2 officers arrived, one of them looked like he'd been doing this job forever. Older guy, quiet, didn't say much. I told them everything, from the beginning. When I mentioned the whistle coming from inside the house, the younger officer tried to hide a smirk, but the older one didn't even blink. He just stared at me, and for a moment his face went pale, like something I said hit too close to home. He asked what day it started. I told him, September 17th. He didn't say another word after that, just nodded slowly and stepped outside, standing there for a long time, scanning the tree line. They took a report, said they'd patrol the area a few nights, and that was that. But I knew from the look on that man's face that something about what I told him wasn't new to him. It was like he already knew the story. That night, the whistle came back, and I swear it was louder. I sat on the edge of the bed, gun in hand, listening. My wife was buried under the covers, barely breathing. I feel like what's happening isn't just affecting her mentally, it's affecting her physically, like it's draining her energy. It's more than just emotional exhaustion. But when I ask if she's okay, she forces a smile and says she is. But I can feel the tension in her body, the silent panic. The whistle came from the porch this time, slow and mocking. And then it stopped. Silence for maybe 30 seconds. Then it started again, from the back of the house. It was moving. I went to the window, but didn't see anything. Just the faint reflection of my own face, pale and sleepless. I stayed there for hours, until the sky turned gray. At some point, I looked out the window again. And that was the first time I actually saw something. And honestly, I wish I hadn't. It was this dark shape, like the shadow of a person, but moving, alive somehow. There was no light behind it, no reason for there to be a shadow at all, yet it was there. Then what looked like its head turned, and even though it didn't have eyes, I knew, without a doubt, it was looking right at me. I stumbled back, tripped over the rug, and hit the floor hard. My wife asked what happened, if I was okay. All I managed to say was that I got spooked, that I thought I saw something, but must have been wrong. I had to be wrong. Because if I told her what I really saw, it would have made it real. Since then, I've stopped trying to prove anything. I turned off the cameras. I don't check the yard anymore. I just stay inside, waiting for the sound to come again, because it always does. Every single night. I've started to think that maybe it's not someone trying to scare us. Maybe it's not someone at all. Because I don't even understand what it could be. All I know is that the whistle hasn't stopped since that first night. I feel like it's going to get worse. And I'm especially afraid of Halloween night. Before all this, I didn't believe in anything. But now I feel like those stories about the veil between our world and the other getting thinner might have some truth to them. My grandmother used to tell me stories when I was a kid. What used to be just stories now echo in my skull like a bad omen. We're both desperate and don't know what to do. What I'm about to tell you happened last year, on Halloween night. Since then, it hasn't really stopped happening. Even though nothing truly bad has happened yet, I'm scared that this coming October 31st, something genuinely terrible might take place. Honestly, I was never the kind of person to believe in superstitions or forest creatures, but now, I don't know what to believe anymore. All I know is that I'm scared. I'm scared for myself, and especially for my parents. It was late October in West Virginia, and I had the house all to myself. My parents had driven down to visit my aunt in South Carolina for the week like they did every year around Halloween. I'd always hated Halloween, not because of the costumes or candy, but because of something that happened when I was 9. A neighbor, a kid I used to play with, did something so messed up to a stray cat that the image never really left me. Back then, it was common for cults to operate around here, and people would hurt animals. Even though I know it's much rarer these days, the idea that it could still be happening haunts me. Since then, Halloween had this dark, ugly feeling attached to it. I never celebrated it, never dressed up, never even opened the door to trick-or-treaters. At the time this happened, I wasn't living with my parents anymore. I lived in the city, but I used to come back often and spend a few weeks with them at the house. In the city, Halloween was a big deal, but out there, in such an isolated area, I doubted anyone would bother us. The house sat on the edge of the woods, a good 20-minute drive from the nearest town. No close neighbors, no streetlights. Just an old two-story house surrounded by a tree line that always looked like it was hiding something. My parents had built their lives out here, loving the silence. For me, that silence always felt heavy. That's why I chose to move to an area with more people. Still, I liked feeling that isolation sometimes, which is why I often went back to stay with them. I liked experiencing that kind of quiet on my own terms, only when I decided I wanted it. I had spent most of the evening in the living room, scrolling through my phone with the TV on just to fill the space with some background noise. It was a little after 8 p.m. when I started noticing how quiet everything outside had gotten. Not unusual for this place, but different. The crickets weren't chirping, and the woods behind the house sounded dead. I know it sounds like a total cliché, and everyone says this kind of thing happens. But the truth is, ever since this happened a year ago, I've been obsessed with the weird stuff that goes on in this part of the country. The way everything goes quiet right before shit hits the fan is way too common. I don't know why it happens, but some people say animals go silent when there's a predator nearby. Honestly, that explanation makes a lot of sense to me, but even then, I'm still not sure what to think of it. At 10:17 p.m., the first thing happened. A loud beep from the security system. Rear motion sensor triggered. The back of the property. The cameras were old but still worked fine, so I pulled up the feed on my phone. Nothing. Just darkness and the faint outline of the tree line. I stepped outside to check the panel, my breath visible in the cold air. But there was no movement, no sound. So I reset the alarm and went back inside. Around 11:30, I heard it. A high-pitched whistle coming from somewhere near the trees. Sharp, clean, and way too deliberate to be the wind. Could it have been someone celebrating Halloween? Kids never trick-or-treated in this area. I forced myself to walk to the front door and open it. The porch light spilled out into the yard, lighting up the dirt driveway, the front fence, and a patch of trees. But once again, there was no one there and I didn't see any movement at all. The thing is, of course I'd heard plenty of legends about whistling in the forest. My grandparents and a few close friends who also grew up in those areas take that stuff really seriously. Any other night of the year, I would have just ignored the whistle. Even though I don't believe in that kind of thing, I usually don't let it get to me. But that Halloween night, my first thought was that someone was actually calling out. To make things worse, the doorbell was partially covered by a climbing plant. So anyone who didn't know the house, especially at night, probably wouldn't have even seen it. I even called out, asking if someone was there, but no one answered back. I told myself some teenager was probably messing around, but I couldn't ignore the way that whistle had crawled under my skin. I locked the door and turned off the TV. 10 minutes later, I got up to grab water from the kitchen. When I turned the corner, I saw it. A tall, thin figure standing just outside the sliding glass door that led to the backyard. Taller than any man I'd ever seen, dressed in all black from head to toe, face covered with a black mask. The only thing not black were the eyes. Yellow, narrow, snake-like. They locked on me through the glass. It wasn't some Halloween prank costume. It didn't look cheap. It didn't look like something you'd find in a store. My heart slammed so hard it hurt. I didn't even think. I bolted to my parents' bedroom, grabbed my dad's handgun from the safe, and ran back to the kitchen. But there was nothing there anymore. Beyond the glass, all I could see was the vast, endless darkness of the forest. I didn't sleep after that. I spent the entire night pacing through the house, checking the locks, turning on lights, walking past the windows again and again. Every creak made me flinch, but what kept replaying in my head was those eyes. I tried to convince myself it was just some idiot playing a prank, maybe someone from town trying to scare people out in the sticks. I really convinced myself it was just the darkness, that I'd seen it wrong, that I was just nervous. These days, people make insanely realistic masks anyway. The next day, I decided not to say anything to my parents. I was completely convinced it had just been some Halloween bullshit, and that we wouldn't have any problems. After all, whatever it was hadn't tried to get inside, and by morning, there were no footprints anywhere on the property. I convinced myself there was no reason to panic. The problem is, ever since that night, my parents have had several incidents where the alarm goes off almost always after 3 a.m., especially during certain times of the year. They barely get any sleep for weeks. They even replaced the alarm system, thinking it was a malfunction. They called the police, which is something almost unheard of around here. But the truth is, there's never any sign of anything. Neither of them has ever seen anyone or anything close to what I saw. And obviously, I'm not about to tell them I saw some creature with snake-like eyes. The cameras around the property never capture anything. Even when the alarm goes off, there's nothing there. What really scares me is that Halloween is coming around again, and I can't shake the feeling that things might get worse that night. I've been trying to convince my parents to spend Halloween somewhere else, but they keep insisting they want to stay home. I've always had this one ritual. Every Halloween I go out into the mountains, pack minimal gear, hike up to some remote spot, and spend the night alone. No phone bars, no other campers. Just me, the forest, the lookout cabin or tower I pick, and whatever the night brings. It started off as a way to face fear, to get comfortable being vulnerable. I've done it a few times. Each time there've been odd little things. Creaks, weird shadows, nights where the wind seems to know your name. But I've never been genuinely rattled. Until this year. To be honest, I don't even know what year this whole tradition of mine started. But I think I first heard about it at some random dinner with friends. Someone there was telling the story about how they had a kind of crazy friend who did it. I thought it was weird at the time too. But as I was driving home after that dinner, the idea kept buzzing in my head. And somehow I got obsessed with trying it myself. The first time was absolutely terrifying, but there was something beautiful in that fear I felt. And since that first experience, I gotta say, I've been hooked. I know it probably sounds kinda messed up to most of you, but hey, it makes me happy. We all do what we need to do to stay afloat in a world that sometimes feels like it's about to collapse on top of us. So, yeah. Even though some weird stuff has happened before, Nothing like what went down the last time I did it. Last Halloween, almost a year ago, I chose a spot I'd heard about but never used before. A fire watch tower perched high up on a ridge in the southern Appalachians. One of those old cabins, or towers, built for forest fire lookouts back in the mid-20th century. The hike up in the late afternoon was crisp, leaves turning, air a little sharp, typical for that time of year. I got there just before sunset, climbed the last rough switchbacks, dropped my pack, and got everything set up. The lookout had glass windows all around, panoramic views, also pretty typical for most of these places. At dusk, you could see the ridges rolling away into bluish shadows, and the forest closing in. I set up my sleeping bag in the small wood floor cabin that's connected to the tower structure, gathered some dry wood, started a fire in the metal ring outside, and cooked dinner on my little camp stove. I've always loved watching fire, especially the way it throws shadows around everything near it. I felt confident. I'd done this before. I knew the risks, and I felt ready. One thing I should probably say: I'm not someone who really believes in the supernatural. I mean, sure, I think there are things out there we don't understand, and maybe don't want to understand. But I don't buy into most of the legends and stories floating around about these mountains. I like reading about them, and I like trying to figure out if there's any truth to them. But I'm not someone who genuinely believes the stuff I'm reading. So, after dinner, I went back inside the lookout to grab some papers I'd printed and brought with me, and I started reading. A week or two before leaving, I'd done a bit of digging into local lore. I found this legend about the so-called Black Dog. According to Appalachian folklore, there's this big black dog, ghostly, kinda spectral, that shows up mostly at night on ridgelines and forest roads, often as an omen of misfortune or just a warning. Again, I didn't believe much of it, especially since everyone who claimed to have seen it told a different version, some of them wildly different. Still, I wanted to know more about the legend, and what better night than Halloween? Around 10 p.m., I got up to lock the door tight, make sure the fire I'd lit had burned out, and climbed into my sleeping bag. The sounds around me were completely soothing. The wind, the animals, the whole atmosphere was magical, and it quickly carried me off to sleep. Sometime around 2 a.m., I woke up, not sure why. The lookout was pitch black, and even the forest outside was dark as hell. Could barely see past the tree line. The wind had picked up, so I stood up to get a better look at the landscape around me. That's when I heard something. Maybe a thump. Though it was so quick and sudden that honestly, I'm not totally sure I really heard it. Then I heard it again. Another sound. It was subtle. I froze, looking around, trying to figure out what I'd just heard. I can't really explain what I felt, but I know I felt it. Like that noise didn't belong to everything else around me. The forest wasn't silent. There were plenty of sounds. But somehow, that one stuck out. Then I heard another thump. Louder this time. I couldn't tell if it was coming from the stairs below me or from the roof above, but it definitely sounded like something hitting metal. I thought maybe it was another person trying to use the lookout. These places kind of self-manage. You never know if someone else might show up. Still, it was weird, and honestly, a little terrifying. To think someone might be climbing up the stairs to join me in the middle of the night. I thought about opening the door, shouting into the dark that the place was taken, and asking whoever it was to leave. I really didn't want to share the space with some random person wandering around at that hour. After a short internal debate, I finally opened the door and stepped out onto the small balcony that overlooked the stairs. And that's when I saw it. No doubt about it. On the stairs was this huge black dog, massive, and at the same time kind of transparent, like it was just a reflection of a dog, or its shadow. It was looking right at me, even though I couldn't make out any eyes or facial expression. Then, while we were staring at each other, it suddenly bolted straight toward me. I did exactly the same. Ran for the lookout door, slammed it shut behind me, and locked it. My heart was pounding, mostly because I couldn't come up with a single logical explanation for what I'd just seen. The dog couldn't have been a ghost. I heard it climbing the stairs. But it also couldn't have been a real dog because its body wasn't solid. I could feel it right outside the door, just inches away. I could hear it walking, even breathing. This heavy, labored breathing. The whole night I stayed there, sitting against the door, like the weight of my body might somehow stop it from coming in. While I listened to its footsteps circling the lookout, I kept trying to come up with a logical reason for what I'd seen. Around 5:30 in the morning, I heard it walk down the stairs and disappear back into the woods. I was still panicking, with no idea what I'd actually seen. I wanted it to have just been a dog, no matter how big or scary, because at least that would have been something I could understand. But I knew I hadn't imagined it. I knew that dog wasn't really a dog, not in the way we know them. I called a friend and asked him to come pick me up. Even though cars don't usually go up there, there's this old road, and if you've got a Jeep, you can make it pretty easily. To this day, I haven't told anyone about it. Not even him. I made up some story about someone harassing me and making me feel unsafe. He insisted I go to the cops, but come on. If I told the police what I actually saw, they'd probably try to lock me up in a psych ward or just laugh in my face. So, yeah. I'm telling this for the first time now, because Halloween's just a few days away, and I think for the first time in years, I'm just gonna stay home for the night. I have spent most of my life trying not to remember the autumn of 2001. Yet every October the air turns sharp and smells faintly of iron and smoke. And I find myself pulled back to that small cabin my family used to visit in the high folds of the Appalachian Mountains. A place that once seemed like a refuge, and now feels like a wound carved into the land itself, refusing to close. No matter how much therapy I do, no matter how many times I talk or write about it, it seems that no matter what I do, I can't close the wound. And I'm destined to die with this pain in my chest. I wish reality weren't like this, but it is. And maybe part of the healing process is learning to live with the pain. I don't even know anymore. My father had built that cabin years before I was born, believing that the solitude of the mountain would keep the world at bay, that the forest would cleanse us of everything artificial and cruel. But perhaps there are places that were never meant to hold families, places that feed on silence and memory. And our mistake was thinking that nature was ever gentle with those who lingered too long under its shadow. We would always go in mid-October when the leaves had begun their slow transformation into rust and gold, and the air carried that quiet hum that only dying things seem to know. I also want to apologize to anyone who is listening or reading the story if it seems a little unreal, or even written in a way that makes it seem unreal. I have written it so many times in my diary that it feels as though I have perfected the details, even the most insignificant things. It's as if it has become a protective mechanism, focusing on the smallest details, so I don't have to confront what really happened. I remember the road that wound endlessly upward, the tires crackling over gravel, and the sky thinning until it felt too close. And how my brother Eli sat beside me in the back seat, watching the tree line with a kind of stillness that didn't belong to a child, as if he recognized something waiting for him there. It was our last trip together, though none of us knew that yet. And maybe that is why every detail of that weekend has remained inside me, suspended, like a photograph I never wanted to look at again, but could never quite destroy. The cabin was older every year, its wood swollen from rain and years of neglect. And inside it smelled of ash, old pine, and something faintly sweet. Something that I could never identify, and that seemed to cling to our clothes even after we left. The first night, I remember the forest being utterly still. No wind, no insects. Only that enormous silence pressing against the windows, so heavy that even breathing felt intrusive. And I recall thinking that perhaps the mountain was holding its breath for us, waiting for us to notice how out of place we were. My brother seemed restless that evening, walking circles around the cabin's perimeter as if tracing something invisible. And my parents thought little of it. But there was a look in his eyes that unsettled me, an unfocused calmness, like he was listening to something only he could hear, something deep beneath the ground. That night I read him 3 stories to calm him, but they were old tales. Stories about the mountains. And in a way I think they did calm him, yet they left me in an even greater heap of nerves. I think I knew that something was about to happen. The following day passed in that hazy rhythm of family ritual. The smell of smoke, the slow preparation of meals, my father chopping wood, my mother whistling softly as she went about the day's chores. And yet beneath all of it there was a quiet dissonance, a sense that something beneath the surface of our ordinary gestures was watching, patient and unseen. It was the following night that something happened. At first, I thought I had only dreamed it. I was convinced of it. But then I understood. I woke in the middle of the night, cold. A freezing cold that seemed to seep into my bones. And as my eyes adjusted to the room, I saw my brother at the window, staring at something outside. Something moving in a strange, shadowy way. I never saw its face because I genuinely thought I was dreaming. The next day, I didn't even ask him what had happened, afraid that it was real and that I would have to face it. When we returned home, the silence of the mountain came with us, lodged under our skin. Eli changed first. He began waking in the night, standing by the window for hours, his breath fogging the glass, staring toward the north, as if the mountains had followed him there. He became thinner, paler, and there was something about his stillness that unnerved me. It was as though he were trying to become invisible, to dissolve into that same quiet that had filled the cabin. My parents whispered about stress, about school, about the strange effects of growing up. But I knew that whatever had touched him in those woods was bad, really bad. Weeks passed before he vanished, and when he did, It was not sudden but almost expected, as if he had been slowly slipping away one layer at a time, until finally his absence became visible. My parents found the front door open at dawn, a trail of small footprints leading down the hill toward the river, and then nothing. The search lasted days, and I remember the faces of men covered in mud and exhaustion, the smell of dogs and diesel, the hollow echo of my mother's voice calling a name that I knew already belonged to the trees. There's no point in asking me how I could feel all of this, how I could be so certain. Maybe it was because we were twins and somehow communicated through something other than words. I don't really know. I only know that at the time, I felt it. I knew that he was facing something I couldn't interfere with, that he was going to disappear, probably searching for whatever had reached out to him in the forest. I told my parents parts of it. My father almost hit me, accusing me of trying to use my brother's misfortune to get their attention. But my mother knew that what I said was true. Neither she, nor I, nor Eli himself ever set foot on that cabin floor again. She never allowed it. When they finally found him, it was 6 days later and 20 miles from home, sitting by a creek, barefoot, his clothes dry and his expression calm, as if nothing had happened, as if he had simply gone for a walk through the woods and returned from some place that language could not reach. He was never the same after that, though the doctors said he was unharmed, and for a while we tried to pretend that we could still live as before. But there are certain silences that grow like mold through a family. Certain glances that begin to mean things no one will admit aloud. At this moment, he is confined to a psychiatric hospital. They call him insane, a danger to us. But I know he is not insane. He simply saw something that none of us are capable of understanding. What I'm about to tell you was without a doubt the most stressful and terrifying experience of my life. My husband and I live in West Virginia, and we own 2 houses. When we got married, we bought a small apartment in Charleston. But unfortunately, both my parents passed away very early. Since I'm an only child, I inherited their house. For a long time, we debated whether to sell it and keep the apartment. But both my husband and I always had this fantasy of living somewhere more remote. Since that house is literally in the middle of nowhere, we slowly started restoring it. And now we spend long periods of time living there. When I say the house is completely isolated, I don't mean it's off the grid. We have 2 neighbors, each about a 3-minute drive away. Still, they're also isolated. Nothing particularly strange had ever happened there. Once, our neighbor behaved a little odd, and when we later asked if she was okay, she said she didn't remember any of it. Aside from that, everything had been normal. Maybe the reason nothing weird had ever happened is because both my husband and I are extremely respectful of the woods around us. We know perfectly well that we are the intruders, that the forest is sacred and home to creatures far older than us. So we never go out after dark, and never do anything that could be considered disrespectful. I had also never stayed there alone, until about 2 weeks ago. There had been a small storm, and it was enough for my husband to get called in for work. He's a lineman, so he's often called out on short notice. At first, I thought about going back to our place in Charleston, but the job was supposed to be quick, only a couple of days, and I already felt comfortable enough in that house to stay alone. So that's what I did. The first day was normal. I'll admit I was a little tense. The house is way too big for one person, and the woods at night can feel pretty oppressive. I avoided the windows at all costs and tried to distract myself. Watched a movie, read a book, played some music. Then around 3 in the morning, I woke up with the feeling that my husband was calling me. I've always been a heavy sleeper. Someone calling my name doesn't usually wake me. The room was pitch dark. I couldn't see anything except faint shadows passing across the curtains. I was spooked, but the last thing I wanted was to get out of bed. I pulled the sheets over my head and tried to ignore the feeling as best I could. The next morning, I woke up around 9. The room was bright, and that strange feeling from the night before was completely gone. I felt refreshed and convinced myself it had just been a dream. The rest of the day went normally, just like the day before. I answered a few work emails. Even though I was on vacation, I knew nobody else would handle them if I didn't. Then I distracted myself by going through some boxes of my parents' old documents stored in the attic. Most of it was probably junk, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. And by the time I was done, it was already past 7:30 p.m. I heated up some leftovers from the night before and put on a movie. The house felt so cozy that I must have dozed off on the couch. I didn't go upstairs until around 1:30 in the morning. I was in the bathroom getting ready for bed when I heard something that froze me completely. My husband's voice calling me. That was impossible. He wasn't supposed to be back until the next night. If he had come home early, he would have told me. Besides, he had a key. He could have just walked in. I went to the bedroom window and saw him. There was no doubt. It was him. I opened the window and asked what was going on, and he just kept asking me to let him in. It was his voice, but the way he said it, it wasn't him. Still, it looked like my husband, so I shut the window and started walking toward the bedroom door. But something stopped me. Something wasn't right. I don't know if it was instinct, but I walked back to the window and peeked out without him noticing. That's when I saw his expression, one I'd never seen before. His head kept twitching to the right, over and over, maybe 3 times, before he seemed to grow impatient and look straight toward me. My whole body went cold. I knew right then that wasn't my husband. But how could it not be? The face was the same. The voice was the same. I sat down on the floor, heart racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. It took me several minutes to calm down enough to call my husband. I didn't think he'd answer. He often doesn't have cell service where he works. But he picked up. I asked where he was and if everything was okay. His answer made my stomach drop. He was still at work. Which meant that whatever was outside my house, asking to be let in, wasn't him. I tried to keep my voice steady so I wouldn't worry him. I made up a story about having a weird feeling and just wanting to check on him. I knew if I told him what was really going on, he'd rush home, possibly putting himself in danger or losing his job. I looked out the window again, but he was no longer in view. I checked the other rooms, but I couldn't see him anywhere. Then, as I started walking downstairs, halfway down the steps, I saw his shadow pressed against the kitchen window. The chill that ran through me was so strong I almost fainted. I ran back upstairs and locked myself in the bathroom. For the rest of the night, I kept hearing him, or it, asking to be let in. begging. I couldn't understand what was happening, but I thanked God I hadn't opened the door. When morning finally came, I got up from the bathroom floor and looked out the window. No one was there. The woods were calm and beautiful again, as if nothing had happened. When my husband finally came home that night, I told him everything. We packed up and went back to Charleston. It's been 2 weeks since then, and we haven't returned to my parents' house. I talked to several friends who lived nearby, and they all said whatever was trying to get in was a mimic. My husband thinks it was just some man with bad intentions pretending to be him. But I know what I saw, and what I felt. It was exactly my husband, but not him. He says my panic probably made me build a story that isn't real. Maybe he just doesn't want to face the idea that there are things out there we still don't understand. I don't blame him. Until 2 weeks ago, I didn't believe it either. I said I respected the forest and the beings in it, but I didn't truly understand what that meant. Now my biggest question is why it wanted to come inside, what its intentions were. Some people told me those things are harmless. Others said never to answer or open the door. I don't know what to believe, but I do know one thing. I'm not going back to that house anytime soon. The feeling I had that night was anything but good. I've always thought there's a difference between getting lost and being misplaced. When you're lost, you know it, and some part of you keeps searching for a way back. But when you're misplaced, you don't even realize it until everything familiar has already dissolved. Until the world around you has rearranged itself into something that looks like the place you started, but feels entirely different. That's what the mountains did to me, or maybe to us. I'm still not sure which. All I know is that somewhere around the 5th mile of that second day, the trail we were following stopped feeling like a path and started feeling like a trick. I know the way I'm starting this story might sound a bit strange, and I'm sorry for that. First, because that's honestly how I felt, and it's the best way I can describe it to you. And second, because writing down and putting into words an experience like this feels, at the very least, strange. There were only 2 of us, me and Rachel. We'd planned the trip months before, just a long weekend hiking along the southern stretch of the Appalachians. Somewhere quiet, off-season enough that we wouldn't run into the usual tourists with GoPros and hammocks. I don't mean this in a negative way. I have nothing against them. I just prefer not to appear in other people's videos or background shots. I'd been burned out from work. She just ended a relationship that had taken too much from her, and the whole idea was to disconnect, to breathe air that hadn't touched concrete in a while. We packed light, stuck to the essentials, and agreed not to talk about anything heavier than weather for at least 2 days. The first day went smooth, with a cold morning, dry leaves underfoot, the kind of crisp air that wakes you up better than coffee. The trail wound through ridges that caught the sun in broken slants, lighting up patches of moss like glass. We hiked until our legs ached, found a flat spot near a stream, and set up camp. It was quiet in the good way. No traffic, no hum of power lines, just wind and the faint rush of water. That night we made instant noodles, drank half a flask of whiskey, and fell asleep to the sound of the stream like it was a lullaby we'd forgotten existed. It was the next afternoon when things shifted. Not in any obvious way, just small details. Small enough that they only bothered me once I started connecting them. The air felt thicker. The trees looked different, taller, though I couldn't have said why. Rachel said I was just tired, that my brain was making patterns out of nothing, and she was probably right. But as the day went on, I started to notice something else. The silence. The woods were supposed to be full of life. Birds, insects, the occasional rustle of something small. But by evening, the sound had drained away like someone had turned down a volume knob I didn't know existed. When we stopped to make camp again, I couldn't shake this sense that the place didn't want us there. A low hum in the back of my mind that wouldn't quiet down. Rachel laughed it off when I told her. "It's the woods," she said. "They're just playing tricks on you." But the way she said it sounded forced, like she was trying to convince herself too. We fell asleep early, both of us pretending everything was fine. Somewhere deep in the night, I woke up. No noise, no movement, just a feeling, like I'd been nudged awake by something. I lay there for a long time, eyes open, waiting for a sound that never came. And then I noticed the light. A pale, dim glow filtering through the tent fabric from outside. Steady and colorless. Not fire, not moonlight. I remember holding my breath, counting heartbeats, and then unzipping the tent just enough to see. There was nothing. Just trees. But not like before. The trunks seemed closer together, bending inward slightly, like the forest had shifted shape while we slept. I blinked and it looked normal again, but I swear it hadn't been. That faint glow lingered though, hovering in the distance like a mist that didn't belong to the air around it. I watched it until it faded, until I convinced myself I was dreaming, and crawled back into the tent. In the morning, Rachel said she'd slept great. I didn't mention what I'd seen. We packed up, followed the trail north. But something about it had changed. Turns we didn't remember. Markers missing where they should have been. She said maybe we'd taken a wrong turn, but I'd memorized that route. I knew every bend from the map. Still, nothing looked right anymore. By afternoon, I started hearing it. A soft, almost rhythmic sound. Far away but distinct, like someone dragging a stick through leaves in slow circles. It stopped every time I stopped. Rachel couldn't hear it, said I was imagining things, that maybe it was the wind. But the wind doesn't follow your pace. The wind doesn't stop when you hold your breath. That night I couldn't sleep. The sound was closer, steady now, coming from somewhere behind the tree line. I tried not to move, not to breathe too loud. Eventually I sat up and saw through the mesh of the tent that same pale light again, flickering between the trees. I didn't wake Rachel. I just stared until it went out again. In the morning, I told her what I'd seen. She looked at me the way you look at someone who's scared of their own shadow. Sympathetic, but detached. Said I was probably exhausted. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But when we hiked out that day, I saw prints in the dirt behind our campsite. Bare footprints, small, almost childlike, leading into the woods. She said they'd probably been there before we arrived. I wanted to check, to follow them, but she just kept walking. We made it back to the trailhead the next evening, dirty, tired, barely speaking. Rachel drove us home in silence, hands gripping the wheel tight enough to turn her knuckles white. She didn't bring up what happened, and I didn't either. When I finally did, she laughed like it was a bad memory she'd already outgrown. Said it must have been the altitude, or the light, or my mind playing tricks. maybe she's right. Maybe the mountains just got under my skin in a way they didn't get under hers. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see that pale light again, hovering in the dark, patient and quiet, like it's waiting for me to admit it was real. And the worst part is, I think it was. Hi everyone, and welcome to Horror Spectator. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We dive deep into the darkest, most chilling real-life horror stories out there. And if you're a returning viewer, I'm so glad to have you back, friend. In this video, we're exploring 3 terrifying stories that took place in the Appalachian Mountains during one of my absolute favorite natural phenomena: thunderstorms. I've been wanting to make a video on this topic for a while now, but I decided to wait and post it today for 2 main reasons. First, October and thunderstorms are the perfect combination. Second, well, it's my birthday, so it just felt like the right time. Thank you so much for being here and for choosing to support this channel. I truly hope you enjoy this video as much as I enjoyed reading and putting these stories together. If you have any suggestions, please leave them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's head back into the mountains. And remember, viewer discretion is advised. What I'm about to tell you happened to me last year, around the middle of October. But before I dive into what actually went down, I just need to give you a little context about why I was even in a place that isolated in the first place. The reason I'm pointing this out is because everything happened during about 2 weeks of massive storms. It rained all day. It rained all night. And this exact week this year, it's been the same way. It hasn't stopped raining or thundering. And I don't really know why, but this weather dragged me right back to that time, and I figured maybe it was time to finally talk about it. Basically, I lived with my parents until I started working in another state, and finally got a little bit of freedom. But about 1.5 years after working there, I ended up getting into a fight with a coworker, and we both got fired. Let me just make it clear. It wasn't entirely my fault. Of course, it was wrong to punch someone at work. It was childish not to control my emotions. But I swear I had reached a point where I just couldn't take it anymore. He was the kind of guy who had been harassing me since day one. He'd pull pranks on me, talk shit about me, mock me. I had never even given him a reason to act that way. We had never talked about anything that could have triggered some weird reaction, and I never treated him badly. But for whatever reason, he developed some kind of obsession with me and wouldn't leave me alone. So after punching him and us getting into a fight right there in the office, we both ended up without jobs. With no real prospects of finding something new right away, I had to move back in with my parents. It was supposed to be temporary, just long enough to get back on my feet and figure something out. But the months kept dragging on and nothing came up that would actually allow me to leave. And the thing is, once you've lived on your own and had your independence, moving back in with your parents is honestly one of the worst things that can happen to a person. One day, I was having coffee with an old high school friend, and he picked up on how miserable I was. That's when he told me about this cabin he owned, right in the middle of the woods, where he usually spent his summers. He'd only go there once a year and stay for 3 months. He basically offered me the place for the winter months, rent-free. All he asked in return was that I kept the place in shape while I was there. I hesitated a little at the idea of being in the middle of nowhere, but at least I could drive right up to the cabin. And like I said, I was desperate. I remember leaving that coffee shop with this rush of excitement. Like for the first time in a while, I had a way out. I even walked home in pouring rain, not even caring about getting soaked. 4 days later, I was leaving my parents' house with the car packed and headed straight to the cabin. I had thought about waiting for the storm to calm down a bit, because driving through the woods with low visibility wasn't exactly safe. But the forecast said the storm wasn't going to let up for at least another week, so I figured it was better to just go. Another week trapped in that house with controlling parents, knowing I had an alternative, would have been unbearable. So yeah, 4 days after being handed that escape, I was on the road, driving toward the cabin. The trip would take about 2.5 hours, and since visibility was low and I had to take it slow, I left early in the morning. The road was tough, winding through nothing but forest, and for about an hour I didn't see a single sign of life except for a few isolated places that hinted someone might live out there. When I finally arrived, I couldn't believe how incredible the cabin was. It wasn't nearly as small as I had imagined, and it was fully ready to live in. I can't even explain the rush of pure excitement I felt that first week. I was free from my parents' control, free from that suffocating job, and for the first time in my life, it felt like the forest was giving me a clean slate. Maybe the storm was some kind of sign, a moment of chaos before things finally settled. I was convinced of it. I developed this little routine during that first week, spending my days between exploring the inside of the cabin and wandering around just outside whenever the rain softened enough to actually see the forest. At night, I'd light the fireplace, crack one of the windows open, and just soak in the darkness of the woods, the sound of the storm, and the crackle of the fire. I swear I'd never felt that kind of calm before. It got to the point where I was actually looking forward to nightfall just to hear those sounds. But obviously, the last thing you should ever do out there is keep the windows open at night in the middle of nowhere. The sound was so soothing that one night I actually fell asleep on the couch with the window wide open right above me. I woke up around 4 a.m. to what sounded like something breaking, like glass shattering. And that's when I saw something that froze me to the core. The fireplace was still burning, so its light cast this flickering glow across the floor. And right there, cutting through that glow, were footprints. Footprints I knew weren't mine. They had a clear direction, starting right at the couch where I had been sleeping, which meant whoever or whatever came in through the window had climbed in right above me. The thought alone sent a kind of fear through me that I'd never felt before. The footprints went toward the fireplace, then toward the smaller couch pushed up against the other window. Whoever had entered had sat there, watching me sleep. Another thought that made my stomach drop. Then the footprints led to the kitchen, the direction of the sound that had woken me up. I snapped out of the initial shock just enough to feel that heavy, unmistakable sensation that someone was still inside with me. I crept toward the fireplace, grabbed the sharpest tool I could find, and crouched in the corner, waiting. That's when I started noticing even more details that made my skin crawl. The footprints were bare, but the shape wasn't normal. They looked warped, twisted. And from the kitchen I could hear this breathing, quick and shallow, mixed with what sounded like a whimper. It was like someone crying, but it wasn't human crying. Not really. I shifted my weight because my legs were going numb, and without realizing it, I slipped and hit my back against the wall. The sound wasn't loud, but it was enough. The breathing stopped, and in the middle of the storm outside, there was this heavy silence filling the cabin, like it was swallowing every bit of sound except the rain and thunder. Then it happened too fast for my brain to keep up. Something, or someone, shot out of the kitchen into the living room and leapt through the window. It was so fast, I barely had time to react. And I swear to God, I had never felt terror like that in my life. It wasn't running upright like a normal person. Or at least, not completely. Its back was arched in this way that reminded me of someone really old. But there's no way someone that old could move like that. That speed, that agility, it wasn't right. It took me several seconds just to process what had happened. But when I finally managed to snap out of it, I ran to the window and slammed it shut. That's when I saw it. In the middle of the darkness, between the trees, two glowing eyes were staring right at me. I locked every window, every shutter. The kitchen was a mess. Two glasses shattered on the floor, and in one of them there was this weird, black, sticky residue. I have no idea what the hell that was. But I spent the entire night on edge, cleaning up everything, wiping away the muddy footprints from the floor, trying to hold myself together. By the time the sun came up, the cabin was spotless, and all my bags were lined up by the door, ready to get the hell out of there. Of course, I told my friend everything, but I honestly don't think he really believes me. All he said was that he'd never seen anything like that out there, but he'd keep an eye out. To this day, I have no idea what I saw that night, but it was without a doubt the most terrifying night of my life. It's funny how clear that night still feels to me, even though it's been, what, 3 autumns now? Must have been mid-October, because the trees up here on the ridge had already gone that deep burnt orange and brown, and you could smell the wood smoke from miles off. We'd had a long stretch of dry days, and when the forecast said a thunderstorm was rolling through, I remember feeling weirdly excited, like a kid again. I've always loved storms. It was something I inherited from my mother. Whenever there was a storm, she was absolutely captivated. She'd stop everything she was doing just to absorb the sound. I remember sitting with her many times doing the same thing. And because of that, whenever there was a storm, I not only loved listening to it, but also felt that warm, cozy sense of nostalgia. Those childhood days when the only worry was playing. It was definitely something I passed on to my kids. Ellie was 9 back then, and Sam had just turned 7. Both of them had that same look in their eyes when they heard thunder, like it was Christmas morning. My wife, Marla, hated it, said storms made her anxious. Anyway, we live way out deep in the Appalachians. Not quite West Virginia, not quite Tennessee, but somewhere in that messy in-between where the roads turn to gravel, and you lose cell signal after the second turn. I'm not exaggerating. That's really how it is out here. Our nearest neighbor's about 5 minutes away by car, maybe more when the road's washed out. We were lucky enough to inherit this house from my parents, who unfortunately both passed away quite young. But the house itself was perfect, ideal for raising our kids. Both Marla and I wanted to bring them up surrounded by nature and far from the chaos of the cities. That night, the sky had been heavy all day. That kind of weird yellow-gray color you get before a storm. Around 8, the wind picked up and the first thunder rumbled across the ridge. The kids came running into the kitchen all smiles, begging to sit out on the back porch to watch it roll in. So we bundled up in hoodies and ran outside just as the first fat drops started to fall. The porch light buzzed, the screen door slammed, and the smell of rain hit. That damp, cold, earthy smell that always means fall's really here. It's definitely one of the best smells in life. Now, the back porch overlooks a big slope down into the woods. Beyond that, nothing but darkness and trees that go for miles. I had my old radio playing low, the kind that still picks up stations from God knows where when the air's right, and we just sat there, me, Sam, and Ellie, listening to thunder crack and roll like it was crawling over the mountains. My wife stayed inside, curled up by the fireplace in her favorite reading spot. At some point, lightning flashed bright enough to light up the whole yard, and Ellie pointed, dead serious, out toward the tree line. "Dad, someone's out there." I laughed at first. I mean, it's dark. The rain's playing tricks on your eyes, right? But then another flash hit, and this time I saw something. A shape. I couldn't tell what it was, and I thought it might have just been a tree or a trunk with an odd shape. But I looked closer, fixed my eyes on the spot. And then I saw it again. Looked like a person. Standing still, half hidden by one of the trees at the bottom of the hill. My stomach kinda dropped. If it really was someone, and they'd been watching us, they'd probably realized we'd seen them. The kids started pointing right in that direction, and I kept staring for a long while. I told the kids to go inside and turn on the back floodlights. They didn't argue, just scrambled in through the screen door. I stayed put, waiting. The lights came on, bright white cutting through the rain. But there wasn't anybody there anymore. Just empty yard and wet grass bending in the wind. Which meant it wasn't just a weirdly shaped trunk. It was something capable of moving. And scarier than seeing it, there was the fact that it had been there moments before. But now I didn't know where it was. Didn't know if it had gone away or come closer. I told myself it was probably an animal. Hell, maybe even a deer standing weird. Nobody had ever come that close to the house before, but plenty of deer had, so that had to be the explanation. My wife had always loved animals, and sometimes they'd wander closer when she was around. Maybe it was a scared animal looking for shelter from the storm. But I still locked up every door in that house, front and back, and told Marla what we'd seen. I added that we should stay alert, but that there wasn't much reason to think something was wrong. Whatever it was, it had gone away. I felt bad lying to her like that, but I didn't want to ruin the night without a good reason. We settled in for the night, storm still pounding the roof. Watched some dumb Halloween movie with the kids till about 10. Eventually, we got them to bed. Or tried to. Not 15 minutes later, Sam came out of his room pale as paper. Said someone was knocking on his window. My whole body tensed, and Marla's face went petrified. Now, you gotta understand. His window faces the wood side of the house. No porch. No easy way to reach it. Meaning no one could possibly just peek in or knock on it. Maybe he was still scared from what he'd seen outside and was making it up just so he wouldn't have to sleep alone. Either way, I wasn't going to ignore what he'd just told me. So I went upstairs to his room. I took the flashlight with me, since by that point the power had already gone out. But when I got to his room, I was absolutely horrified. Lightning flashed again, and for a split second, I swear I saw a man's face. Just a shape. But it was there, right against the glass. I yelled, grabbed my old man's gun, and tore out the back door before Marla could even stop me. Rain coming down sideways, thunder so loud it shook the siding. I ran around to the side, where Sam's room was, but there was nobody there. I stood there for a long moment, looking around, trying to figure out where he'd gone, how he'd even managed to look in through the window. But when I turned toward the front, I saw movement. A man, wearing a hooded coat, slipping around the corner of the house. I ran after him, feet sliding in the mud, heart hammering in my throat. I was obviously terrified, but I wasn't about to let him lay a hand on my family. But by the time I rounded the corner, gone. Just the wind and the sound of the rain. That night, we all stayed in the same room. Marla and I awake, listening for any noise. The kids were in our bed, all of us pretending to sleep, but really just waiting for another knock, another flash, another sound. But nothing else happened. Morning came, and with it, the storm calmed down. For a good 2 weeks afterward, we were all pretty tense. We installed security cameras around the property and reinforced the kids' bedroom windows. But nothing ever happened again. We never saw any man, and we have no idea what he wanted. It's strange how something that shattered my life still smells the same when I think about it. Wet leaves, cold metal, that sharp electrical bite in the air right before a storm breaks. I can close my eyes, and I'm right back there. 15, pissed off at the world, half-packed boots not walking straight into the worst night of my life. Everything I'm about to tell you happened more than 30 years ago, but it changed me forever. Especially the way I react to thunderstorms. Back then, my parents were dirt poor. Hell, everyone in that tiny mountain town was. Poor doesn't even cover it. It was straight up miserable. No real jobs, just endless days working yourself to the bone for scraps. My family wasn't any different. And I guess that's part of why everything went down the way it did that night. It was pouring harder than I'd ever seen. Thunder cracked like it was splitting the sky in half, shaking the paper-thin walls of the piece of shit house we called home. Calling it a house was generous. Parts of it might as well have been outdoors. Rain leaked in through the ceiling. Cold wind slipped through holes, and every storm felt like a fight to keep warm and dry. My dad had just come home from work, pissed off like always, ready to unload on me and my mom. I could tell it was going to be bad the second he stepped inside. There was a way he moved, the way he yanked off his boots, that meant he needed to break something. That night, I was done. Tired to the bone. I wasn't going to let him take it out on me again, and I damn sure wasn't going to watch him lay a hand on her. I told him he was a coward, that none of it was our fault, that he didn't have the right to dump all his shit on us. He let me finish talking. Then the slap came hard and fast. My face lit up with pain, but I didn't cry. I snapped. I shoved him back with everything I had. He stumbled, lost his balance, and smashed the back of his head against the corner of a piece of furniture. Panic hit me like a wave. I thought I'd killed him, but he was still breathing. My mom and I dragged him to the bed. I couldn't handle everything burning inside me. Anger, fear, guilt. It was too much. So I threw the front door open and just ran. We lived out in the Appalachian Mountains in Pennsylvania. Running off in the middle of the night wasn't new for me, but doing it during a storm like that was. I sprinted through the fields, rain soaking through every layer, the sky lighting up in white flashes. Eventually, I got scared of getting hit by lightning, so I stopped under a cluster of trees that offered a bit of cover. I was drenched, shivering, but burning up inside. Without thinking, I let out the scream, raw and furious. I lived in a place where I could scream all I wanted. First, it was almost impossible for anyone to actually hear me, especially with the storm roaring like that. And second, it was night. Nobody went into the woods after dark. Not ever. And definitely not after hearing a scream. I was dead wrong. Not even 30 seconds after the scream, I felt something move on my right. I turned, and there was a man. Hood pulled low, holding something long in his hand. It looked like a baseball bat. And the second I saw him, I just knew. He meant me harm. I tried to step back, but he lunged forward and swung. Then, everything went black. When I came to, my head was pounding. It was dark, and the air smelled foul, mold, rot, something sour. I knew exactly where I was. Not far from my house, there were these old ruins everyone called cursed. People said ghosts roamed there. But what scared us more than ghosts was the fact that it was falling apart. The only thing still standing was the shell of an old church. I'd been there before, with some friends. My wrists burned like fire. I realized my hands were tied behind my back with some kind of rough rope. It dug into my skin, too tight. Like whoever did it wanted to make sure I didn't move an inch. Then I heard a voice, and realized I wasn't alone. I couldn't make out what was being said, just the tone. I knew that voice, which made it worse. The door creaked open, slow and heavy, and I heard footsteps fading away. Then daylight slammed into me like a punch. It burned through my eyes, sharp and blinding, and my head felt like it was splitting in two. I don't know how long I stayed there after that. Soaked to the bone, teeth chattering, every muscle locked up. The silence pressed down on me, thick and cold. Nobody came back. It was just me, tied up, waiting for something I couldn't even name. I honestly thought I was gonna die there. Nobody ever came through that area, not unless it was some hunter cutting through the woods, and even that was rare. And it sure as hell wasn't hunting season. Outside, the storm was still raging, pounding against the broken walls like it wanted in. I remember lying there, tied up, soaked, and freezing, knowing no one was coming. Then, finally, the door opened again and a man stepped inside. For a split second, I felt pure terror, and then relief. It was Mr. Buck, our closest neighbor. He was the kind of guy who'd give us potatoes when we couldn't afford dinner. For a heartbeat, I thought maybe he'd been the one who took me. But the panic in his voice killed that thought fast. He was there to help. He rushed to untie me, asking questions I couldn't even process. Who did this? What happened? How long had I been there? I couldn't answer. I just kept whispering, "Thank you," and begging him to hurry. Then the door slammed open again. Another man, the same shadow I'd seen in the woods, was there. The second he saw us, he bolted. Mr. Buck almost ran after him, but I grabbed him with what little strength I had left. I begged without words, and he stayed. He took me home. My mom was sobbing when she saw me, wrapping herself around me like she could keep me from vanishing again. My dad started to raise his voice, until Buck shut him down with a look and a few hard words. There was no police report, no search. No one even knocked on a door to ask what happened. People around there didn't want to get involved. They didn't want trouble. They didn't want their names in anything. So everyone just went quiet, like it never happened. And that was it. Nothing was done. That was it. My parents died young. The house is still there, rotting like it always did. I only went back once, to help Mr. Buck when he was old and alone. One time I asked him how he'd even managed to find me, and he said my mom had shown up at his door, crying and begging for help. My dad couldn't have cared less if I lived or died, so she went to the only person she trusted. Buck told me he'd spent the whole damn night out there searching for me, wandering through the woods with nothing to go on. Any tracks that might have been there were already washed away by the storm. He said he only passed by the old ruins by sheer luck. For a second, he figured maybe I'd run off and taken shelter in the church. He never once thought I'd been kidnapped. I asked him if he had any idea who it was. He said he had his suspicions, and if he was right, that man had been rotting in the ground for a long time. After he passed, whatever tie I still had to that place died with him. I've never gone back. I don't plan to. The story I'm about to tell happened over 30 years ago, and for the longest time, I buried it deep in my memory. It was painful to see how no one ever believed me. People called me crazy, said I just wanted attention. So, I did what anyone would do. I shoved those memories into a dark corner of my mind and tried to move on. But even after all these years, I never stopped paying attention, always on the lookout for any news, any messages on obscure forums, anything that might explain or help me make sense of what I saw that night. The reason I'm telling this story now? I found a post on a forum. Some guy said he stumbled upon a file he wasn't supposed to see, something pointing to the existence of something. Something nobody had ever spoken about before. I reached out to him, and that's when I knew. I wasn't crazy. He had proof. He was just as desperate as I was to find out more. It all went down in the summer of '93. My dad and I were road tripping through southern Nevada in his old but reliable van. Man, I loved that thing. Loved those trips. These days, with the whole van life craze, I can't help but feel nostalgic. My dad's gone now, but he left me a massive collection of books, stuff about everything under the sun. A lot of it was the kind of thing people laugh at, say it's all nonsense. He was obsessed with conspiracy theories, always digging into things most folks just wrote off as pure fantasy. Deep down, I think he knew it was probably all just stories, but I guess he liked having an escape from his own reality. That summer, while driving through Nevada, he couldn't resist pulling over near Area 51 to set up camp for the night. I remember being so hyped. My dad had filled my head with wild stories about the place, but when we got there, I felt nothing but disappointment. There was nothing to see. Just a bunch of warning signs, some fences, security cameras, and way off in the distance, a single shack sitting in the middle of the desert. Nowadays, I know everything happens underground, but back then, it was hard to picture. We sat by the tiny camping stove my dad always brought with him. As he made dinner, he kept the stories going, tales about terrifying creatures, aliens that supposedly lived beneath our feet. We hadn't even been sitting there 5 minutes when red lights flooded the van. My dad told me not to worry, that they were just checking us out, making sure we weren't a threat. Nothing to be scared of, he said. After a while, the lights shut off, and we were left in the pitch-black desert, just us and his stories. Then he said he was going for a walk, told me to stay inside, no matter what noises I heard. He wouldn't be long. But he was. And I sat in that van, terrified out of my mind, listening to the sounds outside. I couldn't see a damn thing with the curtains drawn, but I could hear everything. Some noises sounded mechanical, others natural, like animals moving around. But the one thing I remember most was the ground, how it trembled. Not like an earthquake, more like a constant, low vibration. Like a giant truck rolling past, over and over again. By the time my dad came back, I had no idea how much time had passed. But the second I saw him, I knew something was wrong. His face, his movements, he was shaken. And my dad never got shaken. He told me it was time to sleep. I tried asking what had happened, but he just said everything was fine. We'd be leaving in the morning, and no matter what, I was not to open that van door. If I heard anything weird, I had to wake him up immediately. The look in his eyes told me not to push for answers. Then came 3 a.m. I couldn't sleep. That tremor had started up again. That weird, almost rhythmic shaking. And the noises, low, mechanical. I sat up in bed, careful not to wake my dad, who was sleeping like a rock. I thought about opening the van door, just for a second. But I knew better. If my dad caught me, I'd either get my ass beat or be sent straight home. So instead, I did something just as bad. I lifted one of the blinds. I didn't know exactly what I was expecting to see, but at first, there was nothing. Just the same endless stretch of desert, silent, empty, completely lifeless. No movement, no shadows, nothing but the wind scraping against the sand. And then, I heard it. I can't even explain it. It was too fast, too sudden. First, there was this high-pitched sound, sharp, drilling into my skull like it was digging straight into my brain. Then came the mechanical noise, followed by a soft clinking, like glass bottles knocking against each other beneath the window. I was completely caught off guard by what I saw next. A face. It wasn't human, and it wasn't an animal. It was something in between. And it was staring straight into my eyes. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. but I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. The body looked animalistic, hunched and unnatural. But those eyes were human. Then, out of nowhere, a gunshot and a sound. Something between a scream and metal grinding against metal. I wish I could describe it better, but no matter how hard I try, I've never heard anything like it again in my life. And just like that, the thing took off, running so fast, it barely looked real. 3 jeeps came speeding after it, their headlights slicing through the darkness. By the time my dad woke up and looked outside, they were already far and gone. Needless to say, no one ever believed me. And over the years, I got really good at shoving those eyes back into the deepest, darkest corners of my mind. Until now. Now, I can't ignore what I saw anymore. Hey, horror spectator here. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on post notifications so you're always in the loop when new videos drop. We post 2 videos every week. If you're really into this content, consider sharing it with your friends. It really helps us grow this community. Now, let's move on to the second story. I never wanted to be involved in any of this. If I could go back and change that day, I would. But once you see something you're not supposed to, once you know something you shouldn't, there's no undoing it. You just have to live with it. Or try to, at least. It was 1998. I was working as a contractor for a defense company. Nothing glamorous, just logistics. My job was making sure equipment, supplies, and classified materials got where they needed to go. Most of the time, I didn't ask questions. I learned early on that asking questions only made things harder. If you wanted to keep your job, you did what you were told and didn't think too much about it. One day, I was assigned to a shipment going to Nevada. They didn't give me many details, just that I'd be driving a truck with highly sensitive cargo and that I was to follow all orders exactly. I had done jobs like this before. Restricted sites, high security. But this one was different. The clearance level was higher and the briefing was unusually strict. They made me sign extra NDAs and warned me that any deviation from protocol would have consequences. We drove through the night, a convoy of 3 trucks escorted by black SUVs. The route was carefully planned, avoiding major highways. We took back roads, cutting through miles of empty desert. By the time we arrived, the sun was coming up, casting a dull orange glow over the mountains. That's when I realized where we were. Area 51. I had heard all the stories, of course. Everyone had. But standing there, looking at the unremarkable entrance with a simple guard post and a few cameras, it felt different. Real. I wasn't supposed to feel anything. Wasn't supposed to be curious. But something about the place made my stomach twist. We were told to park inside a massive hangar. A few guards stood by as men in hazmat suits approached. They ordered us out of the trucks, had us stand in a line while they checked the cargo. I wasn't worried. I didn't know what we were hauling, and I didn't want to know. But then, something went wrong. One of the men inspecting the shipment shouted something I couldn't hear. The energy in the room changed instantly. The guards stiffened, hands moving toward their weapons. The men in hazmat suits scrambled, opening one of the crates faster than they should have. And then the smell hit me. It was awful. Chemical, metallic, and something else I couldn't place. Something rotten. A sound followed. Something soft and wet, like flesh shifting unnaturally. One of the hazmat men stumbled back, tripping over himself. His face, what little I could see of it through the clear visor, had drained of color. I wasn't supposed to see inside that crate. But in the chaos, I did. It looked human. Or at least, close to it. But something was wrong. The body was pale, almost sickly looking, with visible scarring across the torso. It wasn't moving. At least, I don't think it was. The sight of it sent a chill through me, but before I could process anything, someone grabbed me. I didn't even realize I had stepped forward until the guard yanked me back. Another man, someone in a suit, came out of nowhere. He was calm, cold. He leaned in close and said, "You didn't see anything. Understand?" Before I could fully process what I had seen, a man in a suit appeared, moving with the kind of precision that made it clear he was in charge. Without a word, he pressed a clipboard into my hands, the weight of it making my fingers tighten instinctively around the edges. At the bottom of the page, there was a space for my signature. No explanation, no discussion. Just an expectation. I hesitated, but only for a moment. The air around me had shifted, thick with something unspoken, yet unmistakable. This wasn't a request. It wasn't even an order. It was a formality. A final step in something already decided. My name went onto the page with a quick, uneven scrawl. The clipboard was gone before I had even let go of the pen. The man didn't linger, didn't wait for acknowledgement. But before he turned away, he made sure I understood. There was no need for raised voices or elaborate threats. The message was clear in the way he looked at me, in the way the others moved around him with quiet efficiency. There would be no second warnings. I nodded, my heart pounding so hard I thought I'd pass out. They pulled us all aside, ran us through decontamination, questioned us one by one. I stuck to my story. I didn't see anything, didn't know anything, just a driver doing his job. Eventually, they let me go. But the last thing they told me stuck with me. There will be no second warnings. I never worked another job like that again. I got out, changed careers, moved states. For a long time, I convinced myself it didn't matter. That whatever I saw was just a bad memory, a mistake, something my mind twisted into something worse than it was. But sometimes, late at night, I think about that crate, about the thing inside it, and I wonder, where did it come from? What was it for? And worst of all, was it really dead? A few years ago, I found myself in Nevada again, driving through the same lonely highways. I don't know what drew me back, curiosity, nostalgia, maybe just bad luck. But as I passed the endless stretches of desert, I noticed something strange. A convoy of black SUVs, just like the ones from that night, speeding down a back road. They weren't escorting trucks this time, just a single, windowless van. I watched them disappear into the horizon, a familiar unease settling over me. I don't know if I'll ever get real answers. Maybe I don't want them. But I do know one thing. Whatever they were doing back then, they're still doing it now. And some things are better left unseen. On September 16th, 1991, something happened in my life that made me experience fear in a way I never thought possible. It wasn't just any kind of fear. It was a deep, overwhelming dread that shook everything I was, and somehow it shaped who I am today. From that moment on, I had to completely change my life. My name, my identity, the country I lived in. I left everything behind, even the people I knew. Friends, family, acquaintances. I had to start from scratch, with no ties to my past. And only now, after all these years, do I feel brave enough to tell this story. Even now, I do so under complete anonymity, as if the shadow of that night still chases me. Since I was a kid, I was always an introvert, someone who preferred silence over the company of others. This part of me made me a target for bullying, mostly because I was smarter than the other kids my age. The truth, though hard to accept, is that most kids who bully do so because they feel inferior, and use aggression to cover up their own insecurities. The same thing happens in adulthood. But back then, what I knew was that knowledge was the only thing I had. No friends, no family support. Only school, classes, and books. And it was in those things that I found refuge, diving headfirst into my studies, looking for something that would give me meaning and purpose. At 17, something important happened. I entered a math competition at school, a contest that highlighted the brightest young minds. At the end, after I had won, a mysterious man approached me. He talked to me about a unique opportunity. If I was willing to work hard, I could have everything I ever wanted. He told me about the military, a full scholarship for college, and a high salary, way above average. For someone like me, coming from a poor family with no prospects, and being the first to have the chance to go to college, it seemed like a dream come true. My parents didn't hesitate for a second. When I told them, they quickly gave their blessing. And so, I enlisted in the military. The years in the military were smooth, even comfortable, as long as I followed orders without questioning them. The reward for that was the benefits offered, a stable, secure life. Over time, my area of expertise evolved into genetics, and I began working in an innovative and mysterious field where knowledge was power. I spent 7 years developing studies and experiments focused on the genetic improvement of various species. However, without going into too many technical details, I should say that the main goal of my research was improving living organisms, making animals stronger, faster, and smarter. The ultimate goal was something even more ambitious. Perhaps in the distant future, genetically modified humans. The work we did was fascinating, but at the same time, disturbing. And ultimately, it led me to an even more unsettling place. Area 51. I loved what I did. Science was something I was deeply passionate about. However, as time passed, I began questioning the ethical implications of it all. A growing sense of discomfort started to consume me. A feeling that I tried to ignore, but couldn't shake. I talked to some colleagues about it, but none of them seemed genuinely concerned. In fact, the last colleague who raised questions about what we were doing simply disappeared without a trace. Things started to feel even stranger and unsustainable. But my need for answers grew, and one fateful day, I made a decision that would change my life forever. On the night of September 16th, 1991, I took action. Without thinking, without considering the consequences, I stole my supervisor's access card, a card that would allow me to enter highly restricted areas of Area 51, places where no other employee, except for the highest-ranking officials, was allowed to go. I knew that by doing this, I was risking everything, but curiosity, the need to understand what was behind all the secrecy, left me with no choice. What I found behind those doors was something I never imagined could exist. In that lab, inside huge glass tubes submerged in mysterious liquids, were creatures that looked like they came straight out of a nightmare. Animals and life forms that I couldn't even identify. What I saw in that space, what I saw inside those tubes, were things that defy any rational explanation. I knew that what I was witnessing was something beyond the limits of possibility, something that no one should ever see. And it was at that moment, in a desperate impulse, that I decided to quickly return to the lab. Instead of running, I chose to lie down on the floor and pretend that I had been affected by a gas released into the environment as part of an experiment. I knew this was a risky move, but my only hope was that no one would notice anything strange. My first mistake was not realizing that all access in those facilities was strictly controlled. My supervisor would be questioned about entering that area, and being the only one there, my presence at that hour would eventually become the key to exposing my actions. My second mistake, the most serious, was believing they would swallow the lie that I was there by accident. They weren't fools. My life turned into a nightmare. I was interrogated, tortured. The accusation was clear. I was a spy, someone trying to steal precious secrets. I underwent tests and experiments that I don't even know how I survived. But there was a glimmer of hope in the chaos. A colleague, someone who had witnessed my attempt to escape, outraged by what was happening, decided to help me. He did the impossible to get me out of there, and against all odds, I managed to escape. I never knew what happened to him, but unfortunately, I live with the guilt of knowing that he probably didn't survive and risked everything to help me. I spent months on the run, always on the fringes of society. I avoided the big cities, hiding out in mountains and national parks, always terrified of being found. Finally, I managed to cross the border and get to Canada. And from that moment on, I disappeared completely from the map, severing all ties with the world I once knew. Looking back today, my life has never been the same. Fear, distrust became integral parts of my existence. The way I see the world has changed forever, and although I never fully understood what was really going on behind that door, one thing I know for sure is that whatever it wasn't right. And in the end, despite everything that happened, I feel a strange sense of satisfaction knowing I'm no longer part of that dark world. My cousin and I moved to Oregon a few years ago. We've always been fascinated by nature and the mountains, and even though we couldn't afford an isolated house in the middle of nowhere, we found the perfect place on the outskirts of a small town, just a few miles from one of the entrances to the Pacific Crest Trail. It was everything we wanted: peace, proximity to nature, and the freedom to explore trails whenever we wanted. We grew up together, practically like brothers, spending our childhood hiking mountain trails. As we and our parents got busier over the years, we lost that habit, but our love for nature never faded. That year, we decided to go on a 3-day hike along a less traveled section of the Pacific Crest Trail. We wanted to escape the crowds, camp far away from anyone else, and truly experience the vastness of the wilderness. We packed our backpacks with enough supplies, including a gun that my cousin always carried for emergencies. We had no intention of using it, but knowing we were armed gave us some extra security, especially considering that 3 years prior, there had been some brutal murders in the area. Only one of the perpetrators had been caught. The first day on the trail was peaceful. We hiked for hours, passing through dense forests and open stretches with breathtaking views of the mountains in the distance. As the sun started to set, we found a small plateau that seemed like the perfect campsite. We set up our tents, lit a small fire, and sat down to eat. The sky was clear, and the stars began to appear one by one. It was a perfect night, or at least it seemed that way. It was past 10 o'clock when we heard footsteps on the trail. We weren't expecting to run into anyone, especially at that hour. The sound grew closer, slow and deliberate, as if the person was in no hurry at all. We stayed quiet, watching the shadows beyond the fire's glow. My heart started to race. Then, he appeared. He was a tall man, dressed in dark clothing, holding a camera already pointed at us. He was smiling in a way that made my stomach turn. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was something else. Forced. Like he was either trying to hide an ulterior motive, or genuinely pleased to see the panic on our faces. He greeted us without hesitation and said he was a YouTuber, making a documentary about the murders that had happened in the area. Something was deeply wrong with him. The way he introduced himself, his casual tone while discussing murders, the fact that he was out there alone, in the dark, pointing a camera at us without even asking for permission. It all felt off. My cousin and I exchanged a quick glance. We didn't need to say anything to know that this wasn't normal. We had barely spoken or given any sign of consent. We were still too stunned, trying to process what was happening. As the man talked, describing morbid details of the crimes that had supposedly taken place there, my cousin subtly turned toward the forest behind me. His eyes narrowed, and his expression changed instantly. I knew him well enough to understand. He had seen something. Or someone. A chill ran down my spine. Before I could react, he leaned toward me and whispered, barely moving his lips, "There's a man hiding in the trees." That was the moment I understood. This wasn't just some eccentric YouTuber stumbling upon us by chance. This wasn't just a bizarre coincidence. We were about to become part of this man's documentary. The silence grew heavy. My cousin, with a quick and precise movement, opened his backpack and pulled out the gun. He pointed it straight at the man and told him, in a firm, low voice, that he needed to leave immediately. No exaggerated threats, no hesitation. Just a direct warning. But the man didn't react the way we expected. He didn't back away. He didn't try to justify himself. He just smiled, a wide, unsettling smile. And in that instant, my cousin pulled the trigger. The shot missed the man's head by inches. It wasn't meant to hit. If my cousin had wanted to, he would have. That shot was a warning. That's when, from the trees, at least 3 other men suddenly bolted, running in different directions into the forest. Men who had been there the whole time, watching us, waiting. My heart pounded. If my cousin hadn't noticed that hidden figure, how many more minutes would we have had before they did whatever they had planned? The man with the camera was still standing there, staring at us. I expected him to run, to react somehow, but he did nothing. He just tilted his head slightly, as if assessing the situation. Then, without saying a word, he turned off the camera and slowly walked away, disappearing into the darkness, as if he had never been there. We didn't wait to see if they would come back. We packed up everything as fast as we could, shoving what we could into our backpacks, and took off, hiking through the night, guided only by fear and adrenaline. Every sound in the forest felt like someone following us. Every shadow looked like a threat. We walked non-stop until, at dawn, we reached the car. We drove straight to town and went to the police. We reported everything. The encounter, the hidden men, the gunshot, the strange behavior of the so-called YouTuber. They listened, took notes. But it wasn't until they showed us a photograph of the man that we realized just how bad things could have been. His name was Jamie Costwood, and he was wanted in Canada for at least 9 crimes, including brutal murders. Multiple teams were sent into the forest to track down those men, now that they had an exact location. The police said we might be called back to testify, but so far, we haven't heard anything. Hey, Horror Spectator here. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on post notifications so you're always in the loop when new videos drop. We post 2 videos every week. If you're really into this content, consider sharing it with your friends. It really helps us grow this community. Now, let's move on to the second story. I was always a shy kid. The kind who spent most days holed up inside, playing video games or reading. I had few friends and had never been on a real hike, let alone an extended one. When I started college, I met some classmates who were into hiking and occasionally invited me along. I got hooked. But after college, as friendships faded with time, I found myself without anyone to hike or camp with again. I never seriously considered doing it alone, not just because I lacked the experience, but because there were too many horror stories of people disappearing, even seasoned hikers. But one day, while researching the Pacific Crest Trail, I stumbled upon a Facebook group called Western Trekkers. It was dedicated to organizing long-distance hikes. They offered everything from short, one-day hikes to extended, full-on wilderness expeditions where you'd carry your tent and supplies on your back for days. The idea was simple: a group of strangers, all sharing a passion for the outdoors, embarking on a unique adventure together. It seemed safe enough. There were plenty of positive reviews, real people with real profiles, comments about previous trips, and an experienced organizer. But now, after what happened, I know that none of that truly guarantees safety. There were 7 of us when we set out. Each of us carried a heavy backpack, filled with freeze-dried food, water, lightweight tents, and a few personal comforts. 2 jeeps dropped us off at a remote point on the trail, far from any town, far from civilization. The plan was simple: a week of hiking, camping at pre-designated sites until we reached the next exit point, where the jeeps would be waiting to take us back. The expedition leader, a man named Mark, assured us that everything was under control. He had done this trail countless times, knew where to find water, where to set up camp, where to avoid hazards. I trusted him. We all did. The first night felt normal. The sky was clear, moonless, a vast blanket of stars stretching above us. We sat around a small fire, sharing stories about past hikes. Some seemed more experienced than others. There was a couple, Daniel and Emily, who clearly knew their way around the outdoors. A woman named Sarah, quiet but friendly. A man named Ethan, who spoke little and always seemed to be observing the rest of us with an unreadable expression. And then there was Hannah, the youngest of the group, full of energy and enthusiasm. I felt good about the group, like this could be a great way to make some friends. I fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the day's trek, but at some point, I woke up. I remember seeing the shadow of someone moving past my tent. The fire was still smoldering faintly, which meant I hadn't been asleep for long. I figured it was just someone getting up to use the bathroom. Morning came, bringing the rustling sounds of people emerging from their tents. We gathered near the food stash to fix a quick breakfast. That was when we realized Mark was missing. At first, we weren't too concerned. Someone suggested he had gone for a morning walk and would be back soon. But as the minutes stretched into hours, unease settled over us. Something was wrong. That's when I mentioned seeing a figure pass my tent in the night. I hadn't seen who it was, but judging by the shape, it could have been a man. We checked Mark's tent for clues. That's when the weirdness started. His tent was empty, his sleeping bag untouched, as if he had never gone to bed. His boots were inside, near the entrance. That was strange. Did he have another pair? Or had he left barefoot? No one goes hiking without boots. We searched for footprints, but the ground was too dry, too hard. His backpack was still there, and when we looked inside, we found his GPS. That made no sense. He was experienced. He wouldn't have gone anywhere without it. The only thing out of place was his canteen, knocked over next to the backpack, as if he had stepped out of the tent and simply vanished. We split into 2 groups to search for him, but as night fell, there was no sign of Mark. We told ourselves not to panic. People get lost, right? Maybe he had wandered off to relieve himself and lost his bearings, but something felt off. None of us wanted to admit the obvious. We were in the middle of nowhere, and none of us were skilled navigators. Ethan was the first to suggest we stay put, in case Mark found his way back. In the morning, some of us could hike to a higher elevation to get a signal and call for help. Ethan volunteered to go, and Emily offered to go with him. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying the day's events, analyzing how everyone had reacted, what everyone had said. I had no concrete reason to suspect anything, but something about Ethan unsettled me. The way he watched people, the way his expression never changed. I told myself I was being paranoid. We needed to trust each other if we wanted to get out of this. At dawn, Ethan and Emily set off. 3 hours later, they returned, defeated. No signal, no way to contact the authorities. But something about Emily was different. She looked shaken, kept glancing at Ethan like she was afraid of him. I asked if she was okay. She just said yeah, and left it at that. We debated whether to pack up and keep moving. If we followed the trail long enough, we'd find service. But it was already late afternoon, and we had no idea how far we'd have to go. We decided to stay one more night and head out early in the morning. Nothing could have prepared us for what happened next. At around 5 a.m., Ethan woke us, claiming he had been attacked while going to the bathroom. He didn't know by what, only that something had grabbed at him. His shirt was torn, but he had no visible wounds. It felt theatrical, exaggerated. But the others were panicked, believing every word. Then we realized Emily was gone. That was the moment I knew. Ethan was lying. His story, his behavior, the way Emily had looked at him before. Something was very, very wrong. I decided to play along. If he was involved, I couldn't let him know I suspected him. I needed to act like I believed him. I told the group we had to move. We'd camp wherever we needed to, but we had to find a signal. Ethan hesitated. If he insisted on staying, it would look suspicious, so he agreed. 45 minutes into our hike, we found service. Instantly. How had Ethan and Emily not found it before? Within an hour, search and rescue arrived. They combed the mountains for days. I told the police everything I knew, everything I suspected. But even now, 3 years later, there's been no sign of Mark. No sign of Emily. They vanished without a trace. I've often questioned myself since then. Was I wrong about Ethan? If he was involved, how had he done it without leaving a single clue? They brought search dogs. They searched every possible route. Nothing. I never heard from Ethan again, or from the others. None of us ever spoke after that trip. But something happened in those mountains. Something I still don't understand. I've lived my whole life on the outskirts of Packwood, in a secluded house right on the edge where the forest meets the Pacific Crest Trail. I was always surrounded by nature, by trails stretching through dense vegetation, by paths disappearing into the dark depths of the forest. Because of that, I learned early on how to navigate them, developing a kind of instinct to find my way through that vast, green, shadowy expanse. The story I'm about to tell happened in 2001, when my best friend, Jacob, and I, along with a group of school friends, took on a challenge that changed our life forever. We were only 12 years old, and like any group of kids our age growing up near the woods, we had a natural fascination with the unknown, with exploring abandoned places, with the stories the older folks told that, even when we tried to brush them off, always sent a shiver down our spines. Near where we lived, there was a small village that had been nearly abandoned over the years. A few houses were still habitable, but most were nothing more than decaying wooden skeletons with peeling walls. For months we talked about going there, about exploring those ruins. But despite our curiosity, we never quite built up the courage to go through with it. Then, some older boys heard about our hesitation and dared us to do it. Refusing wasn't an option. We were 12. A challenge was a challenge, and our pride wouldn't let us ignore it. So, we planned everything. And on the night of July 13th, precisely at 10:30 p.m., each of us snuck out of our bedrooms, making sure our parents were asleep. We met at the entrance to the trail leading to the abandoned village. Even though we tried to act tough, the truth was, we were all scared. Part of the fear came from how we kept egging each other on, feeding into our worries, swapping stories that, even though we knew were exaggerated, still made us uneasy. But there was another part, something deeper, that we couldn't ignore. Since we were little, we'd heard our grandparents talk about the forest, about the things that happened there, about why they avoided crossing it after dark. And no matter how much we tried to rationalize those stories as mere superstition, the truth was that, in that moment, swallowed by darkness and surrounded by the sounds of the night, every word of those tales suddenly made perfect sense. We walked for a long time, and it must have been close to midnight when we finally saw the first ruined structure. What I felt in that instant is something I'll never be able to fully describe, but the best way to put it is that everything there felt empty, like we were stepping into a place devoid of life, a spot that, somehow, had been forgotten even by nature itself. The silence was absolute, oppressive, and as cliché as it may sound, that's when we realized that even the usual sounds of the forest had vanished. No crickets, no rustling leaves, nothing. The place didn't just feel like a dead village. It felt like a graveyard. We had been there for a while, exploring the wreckage and trying to keep our cool, when we heard something that froze us to our core. From inside one of the houses, a familiar voice echoed. It was Jacob's mom. She was calling for him in a perfectly normal tone. No urgency, no distress. But it didn't make sense. What was she doing there, in the middle of nowhere, at that hour? How did she know we were there? I immediately looked at Jacob, and his face had gone completely pale, drained of all color. At that moment, he was probably only thinking about the punishment waiting for him when he got home. But to me, it sounded so strange. I knew his mother perfectly well, and yes, it sounded like her, but at the same time, it was an odd sound. For the rest of the group, who didn't know his mom or recognize her voice, what was happening was simply terrifying. Jacob, maybe trying to downplay the situation, told us to hide. If his mom was here, it meant he'd been caught, but there was no reason for all of us to get in trouble. We agreed and backed away behind the trees, watching as he hesitantly walked toward the house's entrance, like he had no other choice. As soon as he stepped inside, the silence swallowed the village again. Time passed. I can't say exactly how long, but it was enough for fear to start overtaking every other emotion. We stood there frozen, waiting for Jacob to come back out, but he never did. I waited and waited until sheer panic began creeping in. Something wasn't right. I had to go get him. The others tried to stop me, but in the end, they agreed to come with me. We circled the house, trying to see if there was another exit, but everything pointed to the front door being the only way in or out. The windows were boarded up with wooden planks and stones that made it impossible to peek inside. We decided to go in. The place was completely empty. No sign of Jacob, no mother, nothing. We searched every corner, every room, climbed up and down the stairs looking for any trace of him. Until suddenly, my blood ran cold. From upstairs, I heard my mom's voice calling my name. I froze. That was impossible. She couldn't be here. And yet, the voice was identical. The tone, the pitch, the way she spoke. The sound echoed down the stairs, reaching the spot where we stood. I didn't need to say anything. We all understood in that same instant that we needed to get out. We bolted through the forest without looking back, lungs burning, panic consuming us, until somehow I made it home. I climbed through my bedroom window, shaking uncontrollably, and spent the rest of the night frozen in place, sitting on my bed, unable to process what had just happened. The next morning, as soon as my mom saw me, she knew something was wrong. I told her everything. Not even 30 minutes later, we were at the police station. Of course, no one believed our story. For weeks, months, we were treated like outcasts, like suspects, like kids who had made up some ridiculous lie to cover up something terrible. They searched for Jacob, combed through the forest, scoured every ruin, but they never found anything. No tracks. No traces. Jacob walked into that house and never came back out. Since that night, I've lived in the shadows of society. I know something lives in that forest, in that village, in that house. And I know it's something that was never meant to be found.